right.
So it looks like the YouTube stuff got figured out.
I'm just waiting for Mila to get back on and then we'll.
Okay.
Okay, we are live on YouTube. We have Mallory's computer that has that's streaming for us, so we're good.
All right, so I know I said 4:15, so just quick show of hands. Josie, are you back? Garish, I see your video's off. Kevin, thank you. Obi. And Rachel. Okay, awesome. Well, at 4:13, I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. A little bit late. Perfect. So we will start out with our first round of citizens to be heard. So if you would like to speak on something that is not our public hearing, we have one public hearing on the agenda for the OKRV Park. If you're here to speak on that, we'll ask that you maintain your comments until that item comes up. If you'd like to make a comment on anything else, go ahead and pop into the chat and we'll give you a chance to come off of mute. Okay. If you're watching on YouTube, we do have another opportunity at about the top of the hour to speak on citizens to be heard. There's also a little bit of a lag. So if you're seeing this, you're about 30 seconds behind us. Come on in, jump into the Zoom link. And if you missed your opportunity, just post into the chat and we'll make sure that you have a chance to state your comments. Okay, ex parte communications and disclosures. Does any member of the commission have any ex parte communications on any agenda items today or any disclosures related to any agenda items today? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to approval of meeting minutes from August 24th, 2020. Any comments on the minutes? If not, I'll take a motion. Okay,
I move that we approve the minutes.
All right.
I second that.
All right. Motion by Bob, seconded by Garish. Any further comments or discussion anyone wants to bring up? All right, I'll call for a vote. Let's see, I'll get my little gallery view. All in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand, say aye if you're Garish, because I can't see you.
Aye.
There.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 approve. Wonderful. Okay, that takes us into our ongoing discussion item on the small area plan. Mila, I'd love if you would just sort of re-up our timing just so we're all on the same page before we talk about where you're at in the drafting process and anything we need to be covering or supporting you with.
Yep, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen since we'll need to do that a little bit later too. So we have mostly just so far pushed it back one meeting. So our draft, I'm hoping that we will have that for next meeting. And then after that, I can't say entirely what the rest of the schedule is going to look like because it's going to be due to legal review time. So we'll work with Christina to see what her schedule looks like. And she was able to just hire back her assistant, and that should help free up a little bit of her time as well. So we'll just keep you posted once we get to legal review after next meeting.
So I see the public hearing for the Planning Commission and the County Council. We had also talked about possibly doing a outdoor meeting or some sort of town hall to be able to solicit feedback. I know going into the fall, there's uncertainties with weather. And then of course, you know, we are still in a pandemic, so we want to be mindful of that. But I would love to see an additional, even if it's keeping within this existing timeline, at least one additional touch point with the community prior to our recommendation on October 26th.
Okay. Hopefully we could schedule that for sometime in early October, I would think.
And Emily, would another possibility for that be doing another kind of online survey that would, present, some well, whatever we're looking for feedback on?
I mean, I don't know at that point. My fear with doing a survey is that it tends to collect a lot of noise about things that are related to this, but not specific to this issue. You know, I don't think it's harmful, but I don't know that we'd want to pay for the outreach that we did this round. I think a more valuable, I mean, my opinion would be a more valuable opportunity would be to have sort of like how we did like open, not hearings, but open sort of town halls and comment sessions in the weeks leading up to the adoption of the, or the recommendation for the high density overlay and the OAO ordinances.
So one option could be a socially distanced town hall at Star Hall. I know that they've done I think a couple events there so far as just keeping people in separate seats. Another option is we could do a virtual town hall. It seems like, you know, a lot of people are pretty Zoom savvy these days. So that's something that we could explore. We could do a meeting out at Bar M. It just depends on, you know, what we think attendance and sort of usefulness of any of these options would be. So do any of those appeal to anyone more than any others? We could also maybe do the ball fields if we wanted to do an outdoor meeting here.
So I would be open to doing both a sort of remote town hall and then an outdoor town hall, with the outdoor town hall appearing first. So if we did have to cancel it for weather related reasons, we would always have the remote town hall to fall back on. But I'd be curious, you know, is there anyone like Kevin, if you think having a survey would be helpful, I think it doesn't hurt to put that out there, and I'd be open to any other suggestions as well.
I guess I wasn't so much advocating specifically for a survey, but I think when you have something that's online that people can do at whatever time fits their schedule, we get a lot better participation. So
Sort of like asynchronous comments more is what you're thinking?
I was trying not to use the word asynchronous, but that's exactly what I mean, yes.
I live in jargon. I live in it.
Anyway, I mean, so I'm not objecting to an outdoor town hall or a live town hall, but if there's just a way for people, you know, other than an email to the commission to say, you know, here's what I think in a sort of, you know, more robust way without having to be at a particular time and place, I think that's valuable.
Great. Any other suggestions or thoughts on that? Cool. So let's do that. So let's aim for early October. You know, perhaps that week that we have the notice going out, perhaps that's when we also, because then we can reinforce that notice at those meetings as well. I think let's plan for maybe a Monday or Tuesday. I don't know if we have a meeting that week, but maybe a Monday or Tuesday, depending on county council planning, county commission planning commission meeting schedules, out at Bar M or the ball fields, either or. I think Bar M being in the area would be wonderful if we can do that, followed by maybe a Thursday evening remote. And then if staff could also, once we have the draft up post legal review, if staff could make sure that that was available publicly with a means for people to be able to comment whenever it met their schedule. I'll avoid the A word, the jargon. I think that would be wonderful.
And just a brief comment, Bar M is a great idea. The ball field is probably more convenient for people, so they don't have to travel as far. And I guess what Kevin was talking about, you got to help me here, Kevin, some place where people could kind of just post comments that then we'd look over. Is that roughly right, rather than emailing them in?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing that's easy to do is just, you know, post some plans online and say, hey, send us an email if you have a comment. But I think we would get higher quality feedback if we, you know, had a website where someone, you know, gets to look at the alternatives and then we ask them specific questions. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not worth the trouble, and maybe just having an email feedback is fine. But
I think it's relatively easy to do. I took the Mill Creek Parkway group survey last week, and that format worked really well. So it pointed you towards the documentation online and then had questions that referenced it to sort of specifically get your feedback. So Mila, if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I would
I have.
Maybe that could be a good guide
Mhm.
for us.
And Emily, I'd like to make a comment too.
Go ahead, Garish.
Okay, I kind of agree with Bob. I think most people are familiar with that area that we're studying, and I think if we're looking for good participation, that maybe the ball field would allow more people to show up without doing the drive up there.
Great. So let's plan on that. I think that's wonderful.
Okay.
Any other comments related to the timeline or questions before we move on to talking about the content and the drafting process? All right. Mila.
Okay. So let's switch to what were we gonna do first? Let's do the vision statement. So I hope everybody had a chance to look at the draft in the packet. I will share this again. Here we go. Can everybody see that? Yeah, okay. Great. So I was looking for comments. Do we have, this was incorporating the comments from the county commissioners at our workshop and from planning commissioners and a little bit of the language changes that we had talked about and then a couple of the other sentiments. I know that the use and enjoyment was one that we wanted to add in there, and I think protect and preserve for future generations was another one that had come out of that workshop. We had also talked about making some of these bullets a little bit less specific, so I took those out. And then also, let's see, I think we moved some of the comment about development down to the bottom area. And I would love to hear your feedback and further edits, and I'm hoping that we can finalize this tonight if possible.
So I have a comment to make it even less specific. In the second bullet, it says protect the views of the surrounding ridge lines. I think the views we're trying to protect are not just about ridge lines.
Mm-hmm.
So if it just said, protect the scenic views, from,
Okay.
I think that would be better.
Kevin, what do you think about going the other direction and saying protect the views of the surrounding ridge lines and key landmarks, even if we don't specifically shout them out? At least that sort of adds some specificity to the fact that we're not just talking about ridge lines for the sake of interpretation.
I'm just not sure that everything, I don't know that that covers everything. For one, there's these really scenic cliffs, which are not on the ridgeline. They're only about halfway up the cliff. And that's, when I drive by the area, that's one of the things I like looking at the most. I think some of the, certainly in the distance, you can see some famous arches and Arches National Park, but some of the views don't have identifiable landmarks on them, but they are just sort of, nice views that we might want to try to preserve.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess
I agree with Kevin. I think ridge lines really doesn't capture what we're trying to protect there. And I'd also suggest that maybe we consider views from Arches National Park, especially like the windows area of this area. We want to, at least think about, do we want to try to protect views into this area from outside of the area?
So I think the kind of specifics that you were talking about, Emily, in the actual, regulations for some scenic protection area, then it can talk about specific landmarks and put the meat in it. But I think in a vision statement, there's no reason to tie us down like that.
Fine with that. Sounds good.
So does something along the lines of protect the scenic views from Highway 191 and Route 313, acknowledging their status as scenic byways, and something about views from Arches National Park into this area as an
Yeah.
addition.
Yeah, it could be a second sentence,
Mhm.
protect views, from the national park, into this area. I'm not sure that there's actually much that needs protecting there, but I guess if there were, I think we would want to do it.
So
Something you have to investigate.
protect the views from Highway 91, 191, 313, and from Arches National Park. We acknowledge their status as scenic byways and
Mhm.
protected areas or something like that.
Okay.
Garish, you had raised some concern with ecological as the word for bullet 4. Was there a different phrasing? So the line is currently preserve and support the ecological quality of the area, including night skies, water quality, native vegetation, quiet, and contiguous open space used as habitat by local wildlife. And you had pointed out that that really wasn't truly the ecology. Did you have a substitute?
Yeah, I think we could just say natural. And in the first sentence in the vision statement, we could change ecological to natural or something, but it's a small thing, but that's what I recommend is come up with another term that basically captures the same intent.
I think, if I may, as an ecologist, I advocate for including the word ecological because it does have a somewhat more specific meaning than natural.
So in the first sentence, we already have both natural and ecological in there. So that's fine as it is to me. Like on that fourth bullet, I mean, I think it's fine as is, but we could also say protect and support the natural and ecological qualities of the area, including blah, blah, blah.
And I did add, I think that had been Garish's comment maybe from the workshop. And I added some of these details in that fourth bullet to try and address that because I don't think it was clear in the previous version. So if there are some more details that we could add in there that would make that a little bit more clear, then I would be more than happy to do that too.
All right, any additional thoughts?
I have a thought on the first bullet point and the term ethic. And I know that I'm the one that contributed that term. And I think for me, ethic meant like kind of like a wilderness ethic or like a leave no trace ethic. But I don't know if that's what everybody thought. And I feel like it might need some clarification or revision. And my use of that was kind of based on the survey and what folks seem to think was sought after as far as having some like kind of interp type of stuff out in that area to kind of tell people how to interact with the landscape. So
Is values more clear than ethic?
I think possibly, but I wonder if it needs a qualifier, like what kind of values, because values is pretty broad too.
We could also change it, introduction to the character and outdoor ethics of the community. And adding outdoor makes it a little more clear.
Right. It kind of addresses recreation as well.
I think, Mila, I'd be curious to get your, first of all, I agree with that. Mila, I'd be curious to get your guidance here. This is supported by, my interpretation is the things that follow this sort of provide context for this vision statement. So we sort of state these broad values up front and then reinforce them through the specifics, ordinance specifics, and so on that follow. How detailed would you, or like even specific on the words of like, would we have to define what we mean by ethic here? Or is it enough to state something broad and then support it through specific details that follow?
I think that it would be a good idea to add in an adjective or two to that first bullet, just to give it a little bit more context. You know, I mean, if we think about this document as being something that will guide future planning commissions and future county councils or county commissions, then, you know, I think it would be good as far as, you know, amendments in the future or interpretations to know what the, you know, what the commission was thinking specifically in regards to the character and the ethic, because yeah, as Josie was saying, I think it could be construed in many, many different ways right now.
All right, outdoor ethic. How do we feel about that? Anyone have any concerns with that?
I think I would ought to add an S on the end. Outdoor ethics sounds more idiomatic to me.
Do we want to say outdoor ethics of the community through specific signage and interp so it's clear what we are meaning when we say this?
I don't know if it needs to be tethered to interp because it is kind of recognizing the area as like imbuing this quality. So I think broader is okay if we specify the type of ethic or ethics.
Rachel, Garish, Bob, Brian, do you have any recommendations that you would add into this first bullet?
Yeah, I'm focused now on bullet 4, if I'm
Let's focus on
counting
bullet
right.
1 first. Sorry, Bob, just really
Oh,
quick.
okay.
If there's any comments on, because we're talking specifically around this character and ethics, and then we'll come right back to you for bullet 4. Sorry to pause you. Any thoughts on how we define through adjectives the character and the outdoor ethics of the community? Would you make any additional recommendations?
I think for a lot of people from the survey, they're looking at, you know, this is the gateway and it's the entrance to the parks. And when you go into, when you're traveling to a lot of parks, often there's this Disneyland quality, like fake rocks, you know, which is already starting to sprout up around Moab, you know. And I think people are, yeah, that's the, yes, some way to get at that. Just, you know, I think most people believe that it's perfect the way it is, you know, so somehow to sort of maintain that level that it currently is at. Sorry, I'm thinking of words. Someone else go.
All right. So we'll bookmark that. Any other comments on bullet 1? Okay, so as is for drafting purposes, Rachel may suggest some additional language. We're going to add outdoor ethics of the community. We're feeling good about that. Bob, I'm going to turn it back to you. I'm sorry, I interjected over you.
No, that's okay. I'm wondering down in 4 whether we might say water quality and quantity. Now, of course, if you interpreted that strictly, of course, one might think, well, no development. That's not the idea. The idea is enough quantity for wildlife, native plants, etc.
I can definitely add that in.
Great.
And if we're on number 4, then I think natural quiet, or, you know, some sort of descriptor there, another descriptor.
Okay. So we're feeling good about 1. Natural quiet, water quantity. Any other comments on 4? We've done 2.
Yeah.
So we're jumping around. Okay, bullet 3, protect and preserve the recreational uses of the area for future generations to engage with and enjoy. I had one thought here that has been raised by at least one county commissioner more than once, which is the fact that this is not a pristine natural area, that it has existing development, existing uses. And I think it's actually worth, and I don't know if bullet 3 is the right place to call this out, but it seems potentially like a good fit, that, you know, we recognize existing, I don't necessarily want to say we recognize existing use, because that could have different interpretations, but something to the effect of, you know, we respect that this area has been used in different ways, but you know, our goal is on future generations, essentially, right? So regardless of what stands today, we're using this as a sort of reset moment. And that is to say, just because it's there now doesn't mean it needs to be there in the future. Just because this type of development is there now doesn't mean that we should use that to define future use. I realize that's implicit in this larger plan, but I wonder if it's worth calling out as we're talking about future generations and future use.
I think so. I think because when we think about redevelopment and how they would be held to new standards, you know, then we might, if someone wanted to redevelop, then we'd, you know, create more screening, like, you know, for some of the, like the gas station or, you know, certain developments that are there already.
So Mila, maybe you have some ideas for language. If not, I can put some thoughts together, and nothing's come to me as far as good phrasing right now, but I can play around with that.
Do we want this to be a separate bullet, do you think, or do you want to put that into the recreational uses for future generations? I think this would be a separate bullet, it seems
Maybe
like.
it should be a separate bullet. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think yeah, I can play around with something like that, just so that we're clear, or just so that I'm clear. So the beginning of these bullets is that the scenic resource protection area is intended to. So how are you thinking about that phrasing as far as this is intended to? I guess we could, would you want to say something along the lines of, you know, when the opportunity, like enhance the wilderness quality of the area or whatever it is, when the opportunity arises, as far as, you know, acknowledging that we can redevelop in ways that are more in line with this plan. Do we want to start with enhance, do you think, or improve or something like that? Is that what we're thinking?
I almost would use the word reset.
Mm-hmm.
You know, reset, like as a bullet 1, almost or possibly number 2, reset the vision for this area to match existing community priorities and to protect this area for future generations.
Mm-hmm.
So just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, Emily, you're wanting some bullet that would sort of say that if properties get redeveloped in the future, we would look for opportunities of, you know, addressing some of the visual existing impacts out there, or am I totally misunderstanding you?
No, what I'm saying is more narrow. And I mean, I think it's implicit in this larger plan, but I do think it's worth calling out specifically, which is we have heard throughout this process that, you know, hey, it'd be really great to protect the natural quiet of the area, for example, but what are you going to do about the fact that there's a gas station there, right? Or what are you going to do about the fact that there's a highway there? So, you know, I think that this is our opportunity to declare that despite what the county has supported in past for uses in this area, that we are seeing this as a moment for future planning, and that I think by putting it into this as its own separate bullet, it's a point of truth for future county commissions as they're reviewing potential applications against existing uses as well as against area plans such as this.
So you're thinking if something comes up in the future and someone says, well, there's already a gas station out there, you could point to this bullet and I would hear that.
Like, well, you know, we're saying we have this area plan, but we already have this use. So obviously, you know, the two can coexist. So why wouldn't we just support this use? And so I think, you know, delicately suggesting that what has been is not what has to be, and we are being intentional about that as a community.
Yeah,
And I'll
I
think
just
about
sort of-
language for that too.
Okay. I don't want to boil the ocean.
Yeah.
I-
Seems like a bit of like reset, but it's also like a cap. It's like what exists is not precedent, and there's like a noticeable punctuation mark moving forward.
Mhm.
And a little bit on those lines back to bullet 3 and whether this is like incorporated into this new bullet or stays on its own. A little bit of my instinct is to include the word conservation alongside with the word recreation, just because I think recreation can really imply like use and potential abuse sometimes. And so I like to kind of balance it with just outright conservation as well.
And you think that's not covered in bullet 4 already?
I guess I'm just wondering in bullet 3 why we specifically want to call out just recreation uses for future generations.
I see.
I think that was from a comments by the county commission. And it didn't necessarily specifically need to be its own bullet, but that was just incorporating their comment about wanting that to be in there.
Okay.
Preserve and to protect and preserve the recreational uses of the area, to preserve and support the ecological quality, ... to support development appropriate to the area, ...
Right.
to conserve and protect this area for future generations and reset something.
Yeah, something which strengthens the 4th bullet point as much as the 3rd bullet point, so that they're kind of.
I'd make
equivalent.
future generations at the bottom. Like take what I was saying and maybe we can incorporate that in, but I'd say like we have bullet 3, 4, and 5 talking about 3 distinct pillars of this. There's the recreational use, there's the ecological and biological security, and there's development. And I would say, having a bullet that calls out future generations below those sort of, triads them versus puts them in conflict with each other.
I
Joseph,
wonder
does
if
that match with what you were suggesting? I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm curious if that reflects your thinking.
Yeah, I think just like adding similarly strong language, and you're right, we're talking about sort of 3 different things, but we're talking about the same kind of like strength in language of saying this is for perpetuity. So I think whatever kind of brings that together in common language is awesome.
So just to play off of that really quick. So if we removed it from bullet 3 and for bullet 6 instead said, balancing the interests of recreation, ecology, and development to reset our vision of this area, providing for future generations, or something like call them out as something that needs to be in balance. And I really like the word reset because I think it's strong and it really does sort of provide a line in the sand for us. And Mila, I think you were going to add something. And
I was just going to ask if there was maybe any interest in using the word fulfill, as in like fulfill the community's vision for this area. As far as like that, we have the vision, even though some of it might not be what we might want it to be now, and sort of in the scenic resource protection area is intended to fulfill the community's vision for the area. That was another word that came to mind.
I like that.
Mila, where would you put fulfill? I like the word. Where did you just put it? I think in maybe your last sentence.
As part of this bullet number 5, this new bullet, far as like fulfilling the community vision, resetting or 5 or 6, yeah, resetting the area, sort of as another option as a concept, if that's what we wanted to express.
Reset in order to fulfill.
Right.
I like the word.
All right, I'll see what I can come up with for incorporating all of these lovely words uh, for our future. And if anyone has any language that they feel strongly about or that comes to them, please feel free to send it my way, and hopefully we can get this bullet figured out in the next few days.
So just to play back, so we're feeling good about this first sentence. It's a natural beauty and ecological quality of the gateway. Okay. Bullet 1, we recommended adding outdoor ethic and maybe have some additional language that we'd like to see incorporated that Rachel was suggesting. 2, adding Arches National Park as a landmark for protecting the visibility of and acknowledging its status in addition to the scenic byways of 191 and 313. Removing this reference to future generations from bullet 3. Adding biology, water quantity, and natural quiet to bullet 4 as, adjustments rather, I guess, adjust that language. 5, haven't heard any comments, but we've sort of talked about this ad nauseum. So if there's any additional comments, let's address those. And then adding 6, something to the effect of reset in order to fulfill community vision, future generations, language, ... Are we feeling generally good about this? Any other pressing comments that we'd want to make, or are we feeling like this is in good hands with staff to start to draft this?
I think it's fine.
Great. Mila, this is great. Thank you so much
Okay.
to you and Olivia for your work here.
Great. Okay, excellent. I think we're really close on that then. I'm gonna take this one down. And next up we had the resort special use table. So I'll share this screen. So this is also the results of incorporating the workshop from county commissioners and planning commission. And if you'll recall in the workshop, we did have a sort of a more general overview of the use table. So I tried to put some of the concepts that we got from and opinions that we got from county commissioners and discussion with planning commissioners and put it into a draft of what the new use table would actually look like. And I do apologize, I didn't include what it looks like now. I'm sorry about that. But if you look at this, does this look good to everyone? Do we want any other, anything else added or deleted? And then we need to talk about the ones with question marks. And then I believe the ones with stars were, I don't remember what, I think those also needed to be talked about. So I think the stars were ones that we had some guidance on and that we just need to get a final discussion. And then the question marks were ones that we don't have final discussion. I think that they were mostly only raised by maybe one person. So I didn't want to take them off because somebody did want to potentially include them, but at some point we need to decide.
And a quick reminder, just because I know this came up in some of the earlier comments as we were looking at these tables, that there's the sort of the use of whether it's permitted, and then the standards under this protection area could be heightened for any of these uses for this particular area. So if we're concerned about impact or even feasibility of some of these uses, having heightened standards on something like a multifamily home, such as maintaining existing density and so on, it would be up to the developer to present something creative enough to reach those higher standards in order to make this feasible. So we're not just giving a sort of stamp of approval to these. So just want to keep that in mind as we're talking about these. And if you have ideas then for development standards on any of those, tuck those away and we'll come back to those.
And just to add to that is that the way that we would execute that is we would make those uses conditional. So if there are any of those where you do want to have extra standards, then I will change that to a conditional use, and then we can write those standards separately.
So I guess I'm puzzled by the first section in household living. You have a bunch of P's without any question marks. I know the planning commission feedback didn't really correspond to that. And I remember people council members saying, for example, that they thought this wasn't a good place for high density housing. So,
And so none of these have anything to do with density. These are only types of dwellings. And so the reason for that is that they actually would increase the amount of open space when you can have a dwelling that is right next to each other. So you don't have to have all those setbacks. So it was brought up in discussion that, there's no real reason to prevent a duplex or a townhouse, when you're talking about wanting to preserve open space. Again, none of these have anything to do with change of density. So it really would just mean that you can have them be closer together and take up less space overall.
So then are we clear then that we're keeping the allowed density the same, which is 1 unit per 5 acres? So if you wanted to have a 4-unit townhouse, it would have to be on a 20-acre lot?
That's right. Yeah, it seemed, I don't think that there was any interest in changing the density from what I remember.
So I have a question that may be a stupid question, and I apologize. There's no stupid questions. Gonna run with that one. What would be the harm, since we're not doing an overlay where people would opt into development in this area, specifically for development that could have, the reality is that single family homes can have a very large ecological impact when it comes to things like water use and so on. What is the harm to making this entire zone conditional and maintaining that through standards? Having conditional uses as opposed to, or very smaller, not smaller, less permitted uses and many more conditional uses. So,
Emily, I'd like to comment on that. For several years, we've had discussions about getting rid of all the conditional use in the use tables and making them either permitted or unpermitted uses. And if we, it's going to take some extra work, but if we had design standards for any permitted uses where it's where we're thinking that, we want to kind of kick the can down the road and let them come in with a proposal, I think, it's going to be some additional work, but that's more in line with what we were going to do land use code wide to get rid of all the conditional uses and come up with good design standards. So I don't know if going the route of having additional conditional uses really makes sense, but I just wanted to give you that historical perspective.
No, I recognize that. I was on the commission when we started that process. I think in the same breath, we adopted several overlay districts that were in essence, sort of a conditional overlay. So if you got this overlay applied to you, you were able to do things with these specific conditions met that were heightened. And given the fact that we have a lot of interest in development in this area, and we don't have the time to develop more stringent development standards countywide by, in lieu of using an overlay in order to allow for development in this area, that would be one means that we could sort of put this resort special, which only applies to this area. So it really does act more like an overlay than it does an underlying zone of some of the other zones we have in the county. Now, I realize that there are some parcels in the area that are not zoned resort special, and so they'd be requesting an upzone. But even for those, when you're requesting an upzone as a legislative use, you're considering potential future uses, but you aren't required, we can't just look at the plans as a guarantee to the use of that specific application to upzone. So by making these conditional, it would allow us to apply more stringent standards to this area without overlay. Hey, strong opinions loosely held. I am perfectly fine being wrong in this, but I think it's one way to achieve the ends that we've been talking about, which is making this area more water wise, making this area respective to higher development standards, like Rachel's conversation about the fake rock, making this subject to more stringent electrical standards and so on.
So, Amelia, let me try to say what I think Gersh's point was in a slightly different way. I think, my understanding is because of recent Utah Supreme Court decisions, there's not as much difference between conditional uses and permitted uses as there used to be. Like, you get a conditional use, and the only way you can turn it down is if there's standards that you have in the code. You can't just make stuff up. But that's also exactly the situation for permitted uses. I mean, we can have a permitted use, but it has to check the following 6 boxes before it's permitted. Or we can have a conditional use and we can put those same 6 boxes, and there's not much legal difference between them. Or at least I think that's the claim that is often made. I think when you actually go and read those Supreme Court decisions, so I think maybe that's what Garish was saying, is that if we're going to be writing standards, it maybe is less confusing to call it a permitted use. And I think you're correctly pointing out that is that what we're now doing with overlay districts is how we used to think of conditional uses, something that we're kind of can more easily say no to if what's being proposed doesn't match our vision for the area. And so we can do in the overlay zone, but it's hard to do that with a conditional use, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That does help explain. Based on, and this goes back since way before you were on the Planning Commission, Emily, but there were problems in the city of Moab with trying to deny a conditional use permit, and we're likely to set up a situation where the county legislative branch, whatever it's going to be called, is going to have a difficult time turning down conditional use applications. So if we could front end at least the minimum standards that we want to see as far as size of buildings, types of development, colors, whatever, if we can front load that and make them permitted uses, I think we are a lot better off than to continue with having conditional uses and standards that are kind of wishy-washy and people can apply. And then if they don't like the answer that they get, then they take the county to court. And based on the legislative record so far, it seems like they prevail in Utah when they do protest ruling against the conditional use application.
Okay, I'm convinced. So
well,
under this resource protection area, though, we have?
Yeah.
Okay, so
can I clarify just before we get any further down this road? So what we're doing with the scenic resource protection area is applying extra standards to this area. That's literally what's happening. And if you've seen in the list of proposed standards include all of the design standards that we approved as part of the OAO. So that pretty much takes care of all the things that we've been discussing.
And Mila, I would say, as I was thinking of this particular issue, the one unit per 5 acres, very important. And some of those additional standards that you started to list, I think they were additional standards that would say, hey, and if you're going to build, think of it, 1 unit per 5 acres, you ought to put it behind something that's a natural blockage to it. Put it away from the road. Don't make it block views. I think that's a very good way to go.
All right, well, I apologize for our 5-minute detour. I clarified that in my brain, but thank you, Garish and Kevin and
and I do just want to clarify too, seeing I know that it seems like a duplex or a townhouse or multifamily, implies density. However, what I think that actually does is by permitting a townhouse is, just like you're saying, if you have 4 townhouses, and they're in one place, they have to be on 20 acres. So in that case, if you can have 4 townhouses and all of your density is in one spot versus having one residence on each of 5 acres, it can really, it's basically the same principle as cluster development, and you reduce the need for infrastructure. You have 1 driveway versus 5 driveways. You have 1 yard versus, all the things that you get with 5 separate developments, and then you basically end up with 1 development. So that was why it seemed like, and I know that people had mentioned that there wasn't necessarily a reason to prevent these other just types of dwellings. And, absolutely no change in density, and all it does is sort of compact the impact on the land.
All right. Well, thank you for all of that. Again, sorry for the trip down the cul-de-sac.
I wanted to make one small comment on what Mila just said. I do wonder though whether there's a danger, someone's got like a 40-acre lot, which is not so uncommon out there, and it's got, some places that are good for building houses, and then it's got a lot of other places where, because of cliffs or whatever, they might not want to do it. That would sort of facilitate putting a bunch of houses, close to the highway or in some preferred area. Whereas if they were forced to do 5-acre lots, it just wouldn't be desirable to build houses in some. So just throwing that out there.
I think that's what our viewshed standards, there is a setback that we should talk about as far as a minimum setback from the road to address that issue.
Okay.
Okay, so let's look at these by section. So residential uses, any other comments about anything that should be removed or added here? Okay. Public and civic uses.
So I'll just give a little introduction to the questions. The limited daycare was brought up by a county commissioner in regards to the opportunity for a business out there to be able to provide daycare for their employees and not preventing that. All other educational facilities, I don't believe that we had any consensus on that. I don't know off the top of my head entirely. I think that that would mostly just be, really anything else you can think of that would fall under educational facility. So I don't know if the commission wants to take that out and limit it entirely, or if that could, possibly open the door for some other types of educational facilities out there. The government facilities was left in there as per the suggestion of one of the county commissioners as well. And I believe that there was some broad agreement on that. And that was really just to, probably not limit the county. And I think that is the type of thing that we permit as a parking lot, just as an example of one use that was suggested by some of the community surveys. So, if we were to have a county parking lot or something out there, then that would have to be under all other government facilities. So that may be something that we want to leave in there. Let's see, the other, all other passenger terminals. I think that was not suggested in our working draft for the passenger terminals, but I wasn't sure if there was a specific reason that we were taking out the sort of catch-all category and specifically calling out bus stations and trains. And then the telecommunications tower, I think originally we may have talked about allowing that as a conditional use. However, I think in the workshop it was discussed that maybe that kind of thing would be better off over by the airport. So that was another question. And then the utilities are the same. So, if we want to include them as conditional uses, and they are already in the code in many areas, there are some enhanced standards for utilities in our land use code already. Or if we wanted to take that out of this zone entirely and push it more towards the airport potentially. So that's the background on the questions here.
Mila, could you clarify something that came up in the workshop? So there's a question about uses that are primary uses of a development versus uses that are supportive uses. So for example, for the daycare, there was the case of, well, if I had a field research station and I wanted to have a daycare for people who wanted to take adult courses, that wouldn't be a primary use. So that wouldn't have to be fall under that daycare limited. Is that true? Was there clarification there? Because that was something that there was some, so we would have to have that as a permitted use in order to combine it. Okay, because
all the uses need to be permitted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it was also mentioned around retail, which we haven't gotten to, Is that
Right.
the same case
That
there?
was the case I was thinking of. Yep, thank you. Okay.
Yep.
And does all other passenger terminals, would that include an airstrip?
No,
I was looking for that in the table, and
airport and heliport are just above bus station.
airport and heliport are, so airport would be airstrip. So I'm just trying to think about what else would be in a passenger.
I don't really know, to be honest. I don't know what else you might be getting on as a passenger
I
other
don't
than
know
a
what's
train or a
included
bus.
into the category. You know, if we put a P beside something, we should have a very clear idea what it's permitting.
Yeah,
And if
I
we
agree.
don't, we should leave it on.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what else you would be getting onto.
I think following up on that, this, you know, field research stations and environmental education centers, you probably need to define somewhere just what those are. I mean, you know, 'cause someone could build a hotel and, you know, put some posters in the lobby. I mean, you know, it seems like there's, if it's allowing overnight lodging, then that's it.
So yeah, so they are defined in our code right now, but this is a task for the Planning Commission next up. Because we can't tackle everything at the exact same time. And currently they're sort of in limbo, similar to the B&Bs, because they, you know, do require overnight accommodations, and that's currently not provided for in the code. So I'm hoping that as soon as we're done with this, we'll be able to address that.
Okay, so in the short term, we're not permitting anything, but in the future, we'll revise the land use code, might be allowing some additional things.
Well, and you can have a field research station or environmental ed center that doesn't have overnight accommodations. So it could still be permitted, but then we need to address the expansion of the OAO to at least include some provisions for this type of facility that would have overnight accommodations.
So let's go top to bottom. Daycare limited. As a parent in this county, I have strong opinions, but would love to hear from the rest of the body first. Anyone opposed to adding this in as a permitted use? Okay, any other comments? All right, so let's add that as a permitted use. All other educational, well, field research stations and environmental education centers. Any concern to this being a permitted use with the context of Kevin and Mila's clarification just now, that this is not specific to overnight use. In fact, because we do not have that allowable at this point, this is daytime use, drop-in use only at this point. Okay, all other educational facilities, that's not defined, right? So Kevin, I'm of your opinion that until it's defined, it shouldn't be in. We can always be additive later. Mila, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, so some of these catch-all categories are actually extremely useful for us to be able to permit businesses that don't quite fall into the specific categories. So, you know, it's not a college or a university. It would just be like any other educational facility that came up. And, you know, a lot of the time we can't necessarily predict exactly what that might mean, but if the commission is okay with educational facilities being out there, you know, I mean, that could mean something like a, you know, like the science lab at Moab Giants, for instance. You know, that could be under the all other educational facilities. You know, these kinds of categories can be, yeah, extremely useful for us in the land use code if there aren't really specific objections.
And,
Well, I guess
and Mila, the question I would have is how dangerous are they? And again, if it's put
yeah.
down there as permitted or even conditional,
Mhm.
then someone can come along with whatever that educational facility is and say, well, it's permitted, or there's, you know, no particular conditions I can't meet. So that's
Yeah.
the flip side of the flexibility.
I agree. And I think, you know, so college or university is currently not permitted. You know, other things that are sort of coming to mind would be like, you know, that were also suggested by some of the survey would be like a mountain bike skills area, you know, or like a, I don't know, hot air balloon flying facility, or, you know, something like that, which would be not allowed at all. And, you know, it wouldn't come before the commission or the county commission. You know, that's the kind of thing that just gets entirely turned down, because there's not a provision for somebody who, for a non-permitted use, there's not a way other than a rezone, you know, which we've already talked about. You know, the commission is not interested in entertaining rezones to anything other than resort special. So, you know, it would really just mean that none of those sorts of things would be out there. You know, that, yeah, like nothing else would be able to be out there, and you wouldn't ever see it come across your desks.
So I mean, your point's well taken about it's useful to have these catch-all categories for things we don't anticipate, but I would feel more comfortable doing that in permissive zones like the highway commercial zone, where we're allowing all kinds of stuff anyway. But you know, this resort special that we're working on now is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. It's very restrictive. We're very concerned about visual impacts, and we're, you know, not filling in a lot of these cells in the use table. And so that, again, makes me pretty uncomfortable to, you know, an educational facility, that's very general. I mean, all kinds of things have an educational component. So I guess I would argue for not putting it in there. And if in the future someone comes up with an educational facility that doesn't fit under a field research station or environmental education center, they can ask for a variance. They can ask for the use table to be amended. I mean, it just feels like a safer approach to me than having this big, you know, large category in the use table that we're not sure exactly what sorts of things might appear and come under it.
For the sake of moving forward and drafting, sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, but everything's going to be subject to like building and design standards and setbacks and.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Let's do a quick straw poll as a body, just on, we'll just do it for any of these that are sort of controversial, just to help us move forward. So we'll do a straw poll for having all educational facilities be in here permitted, conditional, or not included, and nothing is binding. So I can't do the grid view since we're screen sharing, so I need you all to speak up, but everyone who would like to have all other educational facilities be permitted, can you just say aye or raise your hand and I'll scroll through? Brian, Garish, I can't hear you. Rachel, I can't hear you. I would say aye. Okay.
I'm undecided.
Okay. Conditional?
I would say unconditional. This is Josie.
You would say conditional? Okay. And then not permitted. Okay.
Yeah, I would say either not permitted or, you know, maybe conditional, but.
Okay. Kevin, Bob. All right. Let's set it in the, let's come back to that. let's get through the, oh, sorry, Kevin, I had a lag. Go ahead.
Well, it seems like the center of mass of our opinion is to have it conditional, which, you know, has some problems, but at least, you know, is less permissive than putting a P there.
Yeah, because I mean, I get the idea of something applicable like a you know, bike skills type of a thing, but I also think of like, you know, like a truck driving school, like the one in Blanding or things like that. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that I just wouldn't want to leave a wide berth for.
So would exploring conditions such as like space on the ground or number of participants, something that commissioners would be interested in?
And probably noise from trucks. I don't have any idea. You'll probably tell me, you'll laugh at me. What about a shooting range? Is that educational? And could it be out there?
Right.
I think almost everything's potentially educational.
Yeah.
So that's why this category worries me so much.
It's a very cynical opinion. Or it's a very positive opinion. I can't decide. Okay, let's keep that conditional. Let's move forward just to get through progress here. Okay, so all other government facilities, kind of same type of question. So straw poll, all who would be comfortable with this being conditional, and we can discuss those conditions in a moment. I see Josie, I see me, I see Kevin. Bob, if you raised your hand, nope, okay. And Garish, Rachel. Okay. Rachel, did you raise your hand on conditional for government facilities?
Yes,
Okay, so that's a majority. So let's just set that as conditional and move on.
I vote aye.
But okay, awesome.
And I was undecided, actually.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Yeah, and I think the main thing that came up in the commission meeting was like around emergency resources, which did seem very applicable.
Okay, great. Okay, all other park and open area, I'm gonna assume is not controversial. Bus station, train, there seemed to be general agreement with this. Any comments or concerns with making these permitted uses? What about all other passenger terminals?
Can anyone think of what an example would be that's,
This is one I'd be comfortable scrapping and not having, even conditional, but I'm curious if anyone disagrees.
I think actually backing up to the bus station and train terminals, more so the bus station. I mean, are we implying this for all potential like private bus carriers going through, or can we specify public transportation? Is that something that we want to dissect?
thinking that this is a very, who in their right mind would build like a big bus station, far out here rather than in town. And so what people were envisioning is more likely is some kind of shuttle, maybe like a bus that takes you to Island in the Sky or something. And they wanted to permit that. I mean, I guess I agree with you that, a big, like, large bus station with lots of stalls is not something I'd want to see out there, but it also seems unlikely that it would ever be proposed.
In the heightened standards from this area, Mila, can we specify that any bus or train terminals need to have public use? Allow for.
We could, I think it wouldn't necessarily make sense to do that in the scenic standards. We could also do that as a conditional use if that's the direction we're going.
So my opinion on this is that we don't have any pressing demand for building bus and train terminals in this area at the moment. And that this is something we might want to just think about, what does that mean countywide, and adopt that into the general county land use code as opposed to just this scenic area protection. So allow it to be permitted, but then put stricter standards in the general land use code. So is there any opposition to going that route and just keeping this permitted for cleanliness? Okay.
Okay, but not all other passenger terminals, right? Okay.
All right. I need to deal with a kid thing. Kevin, can you take over? I'll be right back. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I think the next one on the list is telecommunications tower and facility on an existing structure. You have any comments, Mila, about the question marks there?
There were some comments from planning commissioners originally that that these might be fine with the conditions that are currently in our code. So I just didn't know how the rest of the commission wanted to decide on that.
So I guess my thoughts, it is a pretty common situation that, like a cell phone company will want to use an existing tower, but put some new equipment on it. Sometimes it involves making the tower taller or more obtrusive. So one idea is this could be a conditional use, and the condition we put is that it doesn't significantly increase the visual impact of the tower and doesn't involve any lights, something like that. I guess with those two conditions, it doesn't seem like, I suppose the other question is, are there any existing towers in this area?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Anybody else? Okay, so I have not heard anyone else's opinions.
Sounds reasonable to me as a conditional use there with that.
Okay, so this will be conditional, and we'll write in some conditions that it has to be like something that doesn't change the character of the tower very much. Is that, anyone objects to that or has anything more to say, please speak up.
Just to clarify, when you all are saying conditional, is this sort of like we're just tagging this for later to write stricter, building requirements to make it permitted? Because I thought we were kind of moving away from conditional.
Yeah, I know that what I just said contradicts some things I said earlier, but I was careful earlier to say other people were saying those things. I think there is maybe a use for conditional. We've already got use standards for cell phone towers, and we're not proposing to rewrite that section of the code. So if we want to do something special that applies only in this zone, I think a convenient way to do it is just to make it a conditional use for this zone and list some conditions that are independent of the standards that apply in the rest of the county for cell towers. Does that make sense to you, Mila?
Well, I think that this one actually may be best addressed in the scenic resource protection area standards, because it makes sense to me that something that involves a tower or a structure like that would probably belong in that area.
Okay, so in that case, we could just permit it, and then the conditions we have in mind would be taken care of.
Yeah.
Okay.
That way.
Is everybody okay with that? Speak up if not. So I see Emily's back, so I'll hand you the gavel.
I didn't have context for where you all left it, so I was just staying quiet. Take us home.
We're up to utility substation. Or were you saying actually?
Go for it.
Okay, there's all this utility stuff. I guess one question I have is if there's development out there, I mean, are there already distribution lines or would it necessitate building a substation? I don't really know how far from a substation you have to be, but in Spanish Valley, it seems like they try to have them every 4 or 5 miles. So maybe it would make sense to have these conditional.
And these are conditional in most of the rest of our code as well, with standards that are already in the land use code for specifically to these types of utility facilities.
So does our code define what a transmission facility is?
So this came up somewhat recently. I think that our code doesn't specifically have definitions for these, but I believe a transmission facility is where like utility comes in and then it is boosted or whatever it is, and then it goes out again.
Okay, like the gas plant on the south end.
Maybe, yeah, or like an electricity, kind of whatever they do. They like collect it, I guess, and then it gets redistributed.
What would be the difference between that and a substation? Well, sorry, never mind.
I don't know, unfortunately. That's a question for the building department and the county engineer. The substation is bigger though, I will say that.
So
do you think, Neil, in our visual zone, we could address it? Because it also here is like all other major utility use. I mean, that could be a humongous solar farm if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think that the utility substation and transmission facility, I think that maybe the thing to do is that I can do more research and come back and tell you exactly what those might mean. And the all other major utilities as well. I do think a solar farm would potentially be somewhat tricky with vision standards. I don't know. We had talked about having that, out near the airport again. So I don't know if we would want to keep that in here. Minor utilities uses tend to be a lot smaller in impact. We've had a couple come up recently that ended up getting categorized as this. One of them was like a 10 by 10 shed, essentially, and that was it. So that's the kind of thing that can get categorized as minor utilities use. I think the only thing that I'm thinking of is transportation, and if that might need anything, if we're talking about an electric vehicle charging station out there, for instance, you know, I don't know if that might need some of these supporting facilities to work. And then also, you know, we are exploring, you know, bringing better internet, fiber optic stuff to Grand County. You know, and I don't know if that's something that, you know, might also need to go out here. So,
So could we just ask you to come back with a recommendation on these?
yes, I will do some research.
And I'll remind
It-
everyone that we've been asked by the county commission to pick up looking at the airport area following this long-term planning process, at which point I think we'll also want to revisit some of these more industrial uses here and determine whether or not this is the best place for it. So we can revisit this, you know, within 2 quarters, most likely. So.
Mm-hmm.
And Mila will already know this, but the one that worries me the most is all other major utility use.
Mm-hmm.
So undefined.
Mm-hmm.
For the sake of time, let's move on. And I think where we left it is keeping these as conditional, but waiting for more information from staff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead.
So I can introduce the questions here. These are our commercial uses. We had some question around, so general restaurant was, I believe, relatively without conflict. Fast food was not desired, except for there was one commissioner who I think did see the potential for that out there. So if you want to revisit that, please do. The bar or lounge, I don't believe either it wasn't addressed or I didn't really see much direction as far as that goes. A theater was something that came up during the workshop as a potentially desired use to add to this zone. You know, an outdoor theater kind of a thing. The all other outdoor recreational use, you know, that might include a shooting range. I think that would probably be categorized as that. So commissioners would like to, you should think about that. And that I think was added. I grayed out the overnight accommodations. Of course, we have the OAO guiding those. And then I believe outfitter guide service and facility is currently a conditional use. And then the all personal service oriented uses is also conditional. The all other sales oriented uses was where ideally we could address the suggestion by the commission to allow retail as part of an existing business as a secondary use. So that's something that we could either address by editing the entire use table for all zones, basically, and adding that as a specific line, or we could address that with a condition for this zone in particular. I think that it would be probably cleaner if we did add it as a line in the use table instead of, because our retail is very broad. And if we, basically everything else is in all other sales oriented uses. So if we did want to add, you know, a secondary retail or something along those lines as a, you know, gift shop, we could do that. And then fuel service, I don't think there was consensus on whether or not a gas station should be allowed out there. And again, I would want to say that I'm not sure if we were to get a proposal for like an electric vehicle charging station, I think that might be where it would need to go. So just to keep that in mind. So do you want to start at the top?
Yeah, why don't we kind of just line item, is there anyone who wants to add fast food? Okay. Anyone who does not think restaurant general should be a permitted use? Okay. Anyone that would like to see bar or lounge as a permitted use?
I have a question. Is there really much difference between a bar or lounge and a general restaurant? Is alcohol the only difference?
I think so. I'm not entirely sure what the difference between a bar or lounge
I think a bar and a lounge can serve alcohol without you having to purchase food.
I don't think you can do that in Utah.
They have licenses
Yeah.
in the bar.
I mean, I guess if it's only about alcohol, that doesn't seem like an issue in this area. Unless,
Say, Emily.
Garish, you're breaking up pretty bad.
Emily, I'm not. Oh, I was just going to say it's 5:30. I thought we had a hearing coming up. Are we post?
No, I mean, we got started about 15 minutes late. We normally push into the hour. I think let's try and get through these tables and then we'll come back to our standard agenda. So just because we got started about 15 minutes late, I do think we should sort of speed up this process a little bit and try and get into the drafting process.
Okay, sounds good. Just check the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, there is an example of at least one restaurant I can think of that has an attached bar or lounge. So if we want to see restaurant general, you know, I could see a case for it. But for the sake of time, you know, anyone who would really like to see this as a permitted use?
Yeah, I'd like to,
Okay.
I would like to see it as a permitted use. Is it the Bar M that's out there? What's the name of the
The chuck
restaurant?
wagon?
Yes. Oh, is that also a bar?
I don't
No,
know.
it isn't, huh?
So,
No, but
Huh.
I could foresee a situation where it could be, and it
Okay.
wouldn't necessarily be detrimental.
I'd probably make it permitted, but just one opinion.
let's do that since there's seems like some consensus and for the sake of drafting in order to get citizen comment.
Mhm.
Okay, theater. This has been suggested from a county commissioner to add as a permitted use. Is there anyone who is strongly opposed to this being added as a permitted use in this zone? Okay. All other outdoor recreational use, if we feel comfortable pulling out secondary retail as its own line item, I think we should pull out shooting range as its own line item countywide. I think if we're going to be looking at line items, we might as well do that since that's come up multiple times. Which on a personal note, I wouldn't like to see shooting ranges in this zone. So I guess is there any general consensus to taking that approach of line iteming it, and any thoughts on if we did that permitted, conditional, or not allowed?
So it is such an interesting thing. Mila, would you be able to have a car store? What do I mean? You know, selling cars out there under that label.
Oh, you're
No,
talking about,
that would not be entertainment.
Oh, I'm sorry, entertainment. I
Yeah.
thought we were at the retail general.
We're getting
Okay.
there.
We're getting there. Okay,
yeah,
take
but
all that comment back.
that, to me, that all other outdoor recreational use does seem too broad. And in addition to shooting ranges, I could imagine racetracks, you know, little obstacle courses for motorcycles and things, or for bicycles. You've got those, you know, kind of obstacle course and zip lines. So I guess I would want to break those down and I wouldn't want it to say yes or no to that entire category.
Agreed.
okay, let's pause on that one and come back to it because I think that could probably bring about its own larger discussion, and we'll return to that after our other hearing items if we want to. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to get us to a stable state that we can move on, and we can always circle back a bit later this evening. So that takes us to our outfitter guide service and facility, all personal service oriented uses and all other sales oriented uses. So let's talk about those first two. There was general interest from the Planning Commission and then also by the public to make these uses in this area. Is there interest in making these permitted uses, or would we like to see them as conditional for those first two? Brian, I know you had particularly spoken up in favor of this use in the area. Do you have a strong opinion one way or another? Oh, you're muted, or we can't hear you. Gosh, I hope that doesn't mean you've been trying to say something and I haven't been able to hear you.
Well, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Yep.
Now I'm off.
Yep.
I'm muted now.
We can hear you now. We can hear you.
I mean, I can't hear you guys. Anyhow, somebody muted you guys. Anyhow, I think the first one should be, but personal service oriented uses should be conditional. So a permitted, then conditional.
All right. You can't hear us, but we heard you. Anyone opposed to taking that approach? Permitted for outfitter, guide service, and facility first. Anyone have concerns with that being permitted?
Yeah, there was a concern from the survey about, kind of the proliferation of UTV south of town and avoiding the expansion of that north of town. So I don't know.
Yeah, that would be my worry too, is that ATV outfitters might be a logical thing out there.
Even with conditional standards, Mila, would there be a remedy to addressing that as a particularly harmful potential application of this use?
I think that there would need to be some pretty good justification for why that in particular wasn't allowed. Because otherwise it would fall pretty squarely under outfitter and guide service.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I would be hesitant to permit that, and we know they're proliferating now. So I mean, so it seems like a very real possibility.
Yeah, I think our only, I mean, I would have to think about it a lot more, but something that we could investigate potentially would be decibel limits as a conditional use or as a standard in the conditional use. And this is already a conditional use in this zone. So that would just entail modifying that section of the code already to add, potentially like some decibel limit for a certain time period, I would guess. That might, I hesitate to say if we could do that just in this effort. I think that may need to be a little bit further down. But keeping this as a conditional use is also an option, which we already have. So yeah, there's a little bit of a gray area there, I guess.
I'm certainly concerned about it. Very broad.
Should we flag this as something to come back to then and move on?
That's a great idea. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, all other sales-oriented uses. So Bob has raised the potential for retail sales applying to automotive sales, and this I think dovetails into that last example. So I'm going to recommend we put a pin in this one as well and come back to this sort of larger section after our hearing. Is everyone comfortable with that? Okay. So that leaves us with agriculture.
Did you want to address the fuel service?
Yeah.
Gas stations,
So
electric
that's
charging
currently
stations?
permitted, correct? Or
No,
it's
I don't
not.
believe so.
That would take the, well, nope, because the one in the area is on highway commercial, so. Well, any strong opinions on fuel service?
Well, only if,
Oh, sorry, it is currently permitted in resort special.
I was only going to say, if it were small, I mean, if you had some condition that made it small, I probably wouldn't be much opposed to it. If it's a truck stop, which I guess is a fuel service, I'm highly opposed to it. And of course, if it's permitted and we don't have some conditions, we might well get that.
So a truck stop is actually a light industrial service. It's
Oh, is
specified,
it?
yeah, down a few lines there, and it's
Okay.
not allowed.
So this fuel service would have to be relatively small gas station?
Just a gas station.
Mhm.
I would say having this as a potential secondary permitted use could also be an incentive for development in the area that's more in line with the vehicular motorization that we see in town, providing fuel service on site.
So what about the electric charging stations? That's kind of a fuel service, wouldn't it be?
I think Mila's going to look into whether that would be under that minor utility or if it would apply here.
I think that would be a fuel service.
My opinion on this, as well as on the utilities, is 5 miles up the road is the airport, and it's an area that we are particularly looking at, that the county commission has raised as a potential small industrial area zone. And it is not so inconvenient to drive up there, whether to charge your electric car or your gas powered car. And I would prefer to see this sort of development in that area. I think its vicinity to existing fuel stations provides enough competition for the area that you wouldn't have to be worried about it being sort of a spot alone. So I would like to see this removed, but that would just be my opinion.
Well, I found that convincing. You know, there are gas stations in town and possibly up at the airport. So,
And I'd be fine with removing it. And you also have that other station that's in the area.
Any big concerns about that?
I just wanted to make a short comment about, maybe, when this use table was drawn up, no one was thinking of electric vehicle charging stations, and they are potentially very different from gas stations. So maybe they deserve their own line table, just in the future sometime.
I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's do this. It's 5:45. Let's pause. Let's move on in the agenda. Let's come back to, and I know we still have agriculture, but let's come back in the agenda to these items. I have a feeling agriculture may be controversial, but won't be controversial in every single line item. So if everyone's comfortable with that, let's move forward. And we will come back to this. With that, we normally do citizens to be heard again at 5, and we kind of blew through that. So if anybody is on and would like to be heard as a citizen on an item which is not our public hearing, you're welcome to put a comment in the chat, and we'll invite you to come off of mute to make your comment before moving on to our public hearing. So I'll just give this a few seconds to see if anybody speaks up. Okay, so we'll move on. If you missed your opportunity, you're welcome to put in the chat, and we will make sure that you are heard. So our public hearing tonight is the OK RV Park HDHO 4-unit application. It looks like we do have the applicant on. So we'll invite staff. Shoot, do we do the public hearing opening before the staff report? This is not my night. Do we open the public hearing after the staff report? Yes, thank you. Okay, so Mila, could you please give us the staff report on this? Then we will invite the applicant to make a statement. Then we will open the public hearing for public comment. And I will revisit those rules in just a moment. After public comment, we'll invite the applicant to make a 3-minute comment if they would like to, and then we'll have planning commission conversation. So Mila, thank you.
Okay, so you have seen this property come up before you. It is at 3324 Spanish Valley Drive, immediately adjacent to the OK RV Park that is already there. The OAO has been applied to that property. This one is zoned rural residential, and the applicant is applying for the high density housing overlay. They intend to use it as employee housing. However, that would not necessarily be insured, but the high density housing overlay does ensure that it would be used for employees of a business in Grand County. They are proposing a development that would only be rented, so sort of a cottage court development, so detached apartments basically. This has been reviewed by the development review team a few times. The applicants have worked hard in making the proposal fit all of the land use code and construction code and HDHO requirements. I don't believe we have any remaining conditions. We only have some improvements that they'll need to make. They'll need to extend utilities and install a new driveway, improve the half width on Spanish Valley Drive, and then build their portion of the multi-use pathway, which is something we've been requiring of applicants once that was included in our transportation master plan. Staff supports this project as affordable housing adjacent to the workplace for the intended occupants. We have suggested that the Planning Commission could consider adding another deed restriction, as was discussed with the original overnight accommodations overlay application, to specify that, but we don't feel that that's necessary, considering that it is pretty much guaranteed to be employee housing for a Grand County business regardless. Currently, there's one residence there, and all 4 units would need to be deed restricted to meet the 80% requirement.
Mila, I didn't understand the last point you made about the deed restriction. Sorry. What? Is it
So
just-
something that had come up in previous applications for this property is and that the developer had offered in the past was to additionally restrict these particular houses to employee housing for the OKRV park only. However, staff doesn't feel that this would be necessary, considering that the high density housing overlay restricts housing to employees of a business in Grand County.
Thanks, I understand now.
Mm-hmm.
Mila, I'm trying to remember back to that original conversation from the first application for this parcel. So with the density here, 4 of the 5 units would have, not all of the units would have the deed restriction placed on it. Now, it would not be eligible for OAO use because that parcel is not zoned under the OAO. But there is 1 unit on this that would be eligible for purchase or rent from somebody who is not a Grand County resident or employee, or is every single unit falling under
all
that?
of them? Yeah, so there's currently 1 residence, and the applicant is proposing to add 3. So that brings the total up to 4.
So 4, but it wouldn't be 3 and 1, it would be 4, all of them that would be deed restricted. Okay.
That's right, because that otherwise you're only at 75% and our requirement is 80, so we round up.
Right, okay. All right, any other questions for staff? All right, Mr. Is it Oris? Did I say your name correctly? Oh, you're muted, I can't hear you. There you go. Oh, wait, you're muted again. Hit that button. There you go. Hello.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't do a lot of Zoom, believe it or not. I wasn't really expecting to do kind of a little presentation here. I thought it was kind of handled, but I'm happy to talk. Just to give you a little background, the reason I bought this lot originally was because it was conveyed to me that we could do like 5 accessory RV sites for my employees. And, you know, I went through the motions, as you all know, and that didn't work out. To be honest, in the beginning, even with the RV sites, we always intended for them to be more permanent structures like park models. However, we were just going to kind of wait a few years till we saved up money to buy those things and just do RV sites for now. We have a serious problem with our employees just not being able to find housing in the area. And it kind of got, it's what I've noticed in Moab and our other parks, we have one close to Durango, is that you really have to kind of trade housing in order to get an employee that's going to stay with you a long time, that, you know, is a worthy employee, so to speak. So we just wanted to figure out a way to get more housing to the employees. Not to mention too, if you look at the lot and the dimensions of it and how it's cut up, it's a really odd sized lot. I think it was probably cut off from our lot maybe years and years ago. It's just very odd shaped, and it just makes sense for us to kind of take the lot over to us. But getting back to the 5 RV sites, that obviously got denied. So that's why we are doing our second option, which is the high density, where we would be putting manufactured homes in there. I'm willing to do anything in terms to get a couple of my employees over there, or a couple new employees over there. I mean, if 3 of these things, well, first off, we already have a house that's there. If it's ambiguous enough where you look at the plan and you think 3 is too many, I could do 2, or even 1 for that matter. But I just want the opportunity to house some employees over there. Deed restrictions, happy to sign anything. We are not renting these out to anybody but Grand County employees. I mean, while we own the property, which will be, I mean, we're in it for the long haul, it'll always be our employees. But basically, if you want to deed restrict it to anything else, like Grand County employees, Moab residents, I mean, it's basically going to be our employees no matter what. We'll do anything in terms of separating the property from the park if you need it to be. I mean, basically, I'm all ears. I'm just trying to make this work. That's all.
All right, thank you.
Sorry for kind of mumbling on there.
You're fine. I'm sorry to catch you unprepared, but thank you for making some comments.
Last time, I think Zachariah did the whole speech for me, and I thought that's how it was going to go today. So I wasn't really prepared to kind of plead my case, but I'm happy to.
I have a question for you that I didn't think of earlier. So what's the lot that we're talking about? What's the acreage on it?
1.
Oh, just 1.
Mm-hmm.
And the current zoning is rural residential?
Mm-hmm. That's why this lot you can't do anything else with the lot currently.
Any other questions for the app? Oh, sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so the baseline, if something they could do without any permission from the county would be to add an ADU and have 2 total units on there. So that's the baseline we're starting from. Thanks.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for the applicant or for staff before we open the hearing?
It is located in the high density housing overlay district?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So with that, I will open the public hearing at 5:55. The way we'll run this public hearing is if you would like to make a comment, if you could please pop into the chat, I would like to make a comment. We will call you in the order that those appear. If for whatever reason you're not able to type into the chat area, we'll also do a call for people on their phone afterwards. I also do want to read a letter into the record that came to the Planning Commission but didn't make it into the packet. Do I need to share my screen, Mila, or can I just read this?
You can just read it.
Okay, so this letter is, we are asking the Grand County Planning Commission to vote against the approval of the OKRV Park employee lot high density housing overlay 4-unit development for Adam Orris Fund Stays LLC, 3324 Spanish Valley Drive. The granting of a high density housing to Fund Stays doesn't give our community any guarantees that this housing will be used permanently for employee housing. It would be granted under the intent that Mr. Orris will use this development for employee housing. The nature of its business, overnight renting, and the nature of the building's recreational housings make it very difficult to ensure that these cottages will be hosting only employees. In the past years, the OKRV Park has, on the contrary, stopped hosting Moab employees, first by increasing his RV site monthly rate by 50%, then by stopping weekly rates and monthly rates. It also replaced existing RV Park's employee mobile homes by overnight sites. It shows that Mr. Orris is not diligent in providing employee housing for the community. His first demand was for a change of zoning for overnight accommodations. His second demand was for an HDH employer owned of 5 cabins. See the picture, it's a picture of a cabin. These recreational buildings are built and sold for overnight camping only. These demands show that Mr. Orris wants to keep open the option of using the housing for another purpose than employee housing in close future. These cabins can generate more than $6,000 a month if rented overnight, a big incentive to stop the effort for employees housing or to relocate them. Nuisances. The OKRV Park is a commercial activity in a rural residential area thanks to the grandfathering of an illegal camping. 1 of 5 RVs, camps, cabins, and camping sites on 7.1 acres, a density of 14.8 housing sites of overnight accommodation. With his new lot and 1 house, he still has a total density of 13 house per site, and 13.45 with the new 3 buildings, above the limited 10 HDH of this area. Its activity has been an increasing nuisance to the neighborhood with the development of UTVs and motorized tourism, longer tourist seasons, and the stopping of monthly and weekly rates. Noise pollutions, dozens of big diesel vehicles or RV driving in and out, lots of them pulling trailers with Jeeps, UTVs, cars, motorcycles, groups of UTVs or Jeeps leaving early in the morning, maintenance work during the day. Visual pollution, lines of RVs, trailers, UTVs, and a big density. Air pollution, high concentration of diesel vehicles. Night light pollution, bright street light on the lot, no darkness at night for the neighbors. Increasing loss in property value for the neighbors, open 24/7, traffic any time of the day. High traffic RVs, UTVs, Jeep, higher during weekend in the neighborhood when a lot of residents are resting, and danger for bicycles and pedestrians on Stock Drive, Beeman Drive, and Spanish Valley Drive, 1.6 miles, Spanish Child Road, and Spanish Valley Drive, 1.2 miles. The same roads are already burdened by the traffic of the Rim Village and soon to come Peak View's 127 affordable housing projects in the Sundance Village, 42 lots. Employer housing can have a very high cost for the community. Employer housing can lead to poor quality housing and almost always to lower wages. With lower wages, the community must step up by providing social benefits while the employer pays less taxes. The employee will collect less Social Security. The good use of the employer housing is left to the discretion of the employer and can turn against the interests of the community. Mr. Orris and Fun Stays have less costly options for the community to expand their activity. The Red Rock Park, Mr. Orris owns 2 other RV parks, one of 110 sites next to Durango, one in Moab, the Red Rock Park, 3007 South Highway 191, 6 sites. He can expand there in a commercial environment or in any commercial neighborhood. He could also raise the salary of these 3 employees with $500,000, the approximate cost of what he will spend here. He can raise their salary by $700 a month for 2 years. A RV park activity is not compatible with a rural residential neighborhood, and we believe it should neither be encouraged nor facilitated. It is ruining the same residential area that it's thriving on. Every land adjacent on its activity is losing value, making it possible for this company to buy them and extend even more. Mr. Orvis and Fun Stays is asking for another HDH on his residential property when he already exceeds the HDH on his commercial property. And final paragraph, by building employee housing, they can easily be used otherwise. Fun Stays will increase in commercial activity on site, and we believe that it constitutes a spot zoning. We are asking that it will not be done on residential land. If Fun Stays wants to expand its activity, it should be done in a commercial neighborhood. And this is signed by Keith and Crystal Reynolds, 3340 Spanish Valley Drive. And in a separate copy of this letter, there were signatures from several different neighbors. So I realize that was more than 3 minutes, but we were asked to read that into the record. I think this is something Planning Commission may want to address in their comments. And Mr. Orris, you will have a chance to make a 3-minute comment at the end. I do want to quickly just connect the record with regards to illegal camping due to the way that we applied the overnight accommodation overlay. The campsite itself is not illegal under county zone. And so I just want to make sure that we're being clear about that for the sake of the record. So now, Miss Crystal Reynolds Brussel, that was your letter, but I also will invite you to speak for 3 minutes and you're welcome to come off mute.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for giving me the chance to talk. Yeah, and I want to precise that there were 7 more people that signed this letter, and they're all on the path of the traffic or close to the property. Can I share a document with you?
Mila, I don't know how that works.
I guess I can't, it looks
Nope.
like I can't.
Okay.
I was gonna say, I don't actually have that on mine anymore.
Are you seeing it? Are you seeing
Yes.
my documents right now? Okay. So this is the RV park right next to our property now that he bought the next land.
Ma'am,
Is-
we're seeing a folder. We're not seeing the larger image.
Oh, you're not seeing the larger image, so it looks like it's not working. So I don't know. You don't see the image there. Okay.
Double click the image, open it up, try that.
Okay, what about this one? You see this one?
If it's opening in a new window, then Zoom will probably make you share those windows individually.
Well, it looks like I can't make it. So
If
anyway,
you'd like, after your comments, you're welcome to email those to Mila, and she can post her email address in the chat, and we can pull those up
okay.
after your comment.
All right. So there was a picture of all the RVs and the trailers and all the nuisance that we have next to our property line since they bought that new lot, and they're being it's very, for us, the problem is like now we have only one part of our property line that is very long with the RV park, and pretty much we have RVs all along our property line now and trailers and everything. And then the only place that we have left with no news, we don't see anything, and we kind of a little far away from the RV park. It's that part where they want to build these 3 houses. There is 2 huge cotton trees. It's a nice place, and you kind of make a buffer between our property and the RV park. That's the only place. And now they want to, if you are authorizing these 3 houses there, then we don't even have any protection because there's 2 big trees, and all that protection will be lost, and we'll have 3 more houses where we have already a huge nuisance. So I know that you have only a certain amount of high density lots to give. So if you'd only give it to Mr. Orris, but you give it to somebody else or to Mr. Orris to build somewhere else, then you will still have 3 houses from Moab resident, because there is a certain amount rights that you can grant every year. So if you don't grant it to him, it will be granted to somebody else. So these 3 house employees will still be built and will still benefit the community, where in that case, pretty much all the profits are for Mr. Horace, and the nuisance is really huge for the neighborhood, and you give him the occasion to expand even more his activity that is such a nuisance for us. And I just want to point that on his little plan, you can see that the garbage collector, it's a detail, but we have already everyday garbage collector of the RV park every day. And they just put the garbage collector right next to our property line, and it's right next to the entrance, to the door of the employee house that is there. So it shows that Mr. Horace is not really caring about his employee, because he's just putting garbage collector right in front of their door. So it just shows how employer house is not a good solution, because his interest is profit. And so all he's going to do is about profit. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you. All right, is there anyone else who would like to make a comment during this public hearing? If you are on YouTube and you're wanting to join, you're on about a 30-second delay. So just know that if you're wanting to join in. And Mr. Orris will welcome you to make a 3-minute comment as well. If you'd like you, there's no requirement that you do so before we close the hearing. And ma'am, could you, Ms. Reynolds, would you mind muting, please? Or Mila, could you mute her, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I just need a couple seconds. You know, I don't know what I need to do to convey that this will not be overnight use. I guess you could say that about anybody applying for a permit like this. like I said, I'm willing to separate the park away, like with fencing or landscaping or whatever. Our employees that have worked for us and get an RV site, and the same people that we would be putting over at the other lot would get their site basically for free. I mean, they'd still make at minimum $15 an hour. And I don't know how many other businesses could say that are going to give housing over to people and still pay them what I would consider a pretty decent wage for what they're doing, whether it's cleaning cabins or doing very light office work or a little light maintenance work. And any little nuisances like trash or anything like that, I mean, all you ever have to do is give me a call, and I'm a good neighbor in my house where I live at now, and I'm a good neighbor with all my businesses, and we'll take care of it right away. That's all I got.
Thank you for your comments. All right, if there are no other public comments for the hearing, I am going to close the hearing at 6:07. And we will start commission discussion. So just a reminder, if you have any questions for the applicant or for staff or clarification, we can make those. But if you want to discuss the merits of the application, let's wait until we have, you're welcome to make a motion. Let's wait until we have a motion on the table, and then we'll leave discussion for after the motion. So does anyone have any questions to clarify with staff or with the applicant related to this before we make a motion?
I have a question. I don't know whether it's to staff or the applicant. I got a little bit confused about the question of fences. So my understanding is there's the RV park, and then there's the long, narrow lot that we're considering, and then there's a neighbor property, continuing that direction. Are there any fences on either of those two property lines now? And which fences have been discussed or being proposed, if any?
Can I answer? Do you mind?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
So there would be two fence lines, the fence lines on the interior, which is between the park and the lot. And right now, it's very limited. A lot of it's just landscaping or a very short fence. If it needs to be like a privacy fence, like a standard 6 or 7 foot privacy fence, we're happy to do that. We've already been talking about that already. When we bought the lot, and I don't recall exactly, so I don't want you to think this is the gospel, but there was some fencing between Miss Reynolds' lot and the lot that we bought that we had torn down. And in the last couple months, we're working our way down that lot line to put a normal privacy fence. And the privacy fence is your standard, 6 foot tall privacy fence. So it could be completely, between Miss Reynolds' lot and our lot, there will be a solid fence, and it's already being worked on. And then whatever you would require in between the campground and the employee lot, we're happy to do.
So in particular then, because I think on some OAO, or not OAO, HDH proposals in the past, we've had a requirement for approval is that a privacy fence be erected, with adjacent property owners. And so it sounds like if that were a requirement for this one, you say is something you're already doing anyway, and that would not be a big imposition from your point of view. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, whatever makes people happy and whatever makes it work, we're happy to do it.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, or would somebody like to make a motion?
I have some questions for clarification. First, I wanted to fact check, because in the letter it cites that there were cabins that were approved as high density housing that are now overnight, or I was a little bit confused as to that portion of the letter. Can anyone clarify on that? Do you know what portion I'm talking about? There was a portion that implied that there was already cabins built for this use and that they were repurposed to commercial use.
I think the section you're talking about was that the first request was for a change of zoning for overnight accommodations. And I'm reading verbatim from the letter here. His second demand was for an HDH employee owned of 5 cabins. Yep. And see picture. And the picture is sort of a recreational cabin. And that these buildings are built and sold for overnight camping only, but I don't think it was implying that he had specifically tried to build them, but rather that this model of building is generally used for that purpose. That's my interpretation, but Mila, if you understand something different.
No, that's true. And I'll just clarify that the reason for that is that those were, well, originally part of the overnight or the employee housing RV proposal, and park models by our building department are considered to be RVs essentially. So they don't meet IRC code. So that's why, you know, they're trying to provide long-term permanent housing, but if it's going to be viewed as an RV, then a park model is the way to do that essentially.
Cool. And I had one
And-
other question because
Can I clarify that, since it was my letter and it actually was not what was implied there?
Sure.
Yeah, I think she referred to the fact that I'm saying that by the past, there were mobile homes that were at the back on the RV park, and that was used for either mobile employee or either their employee. It was a mobile home that was rented for monthly rate or for a year, and they just replaced it with sites to be rent overnight. So they destroyed. There was a building that was set for Moab employee or for the employee of the RV park, and they destroyed it and put some teepee on it. And now he's asking for the permission to build employee housings where they have destroyed employee houses that they had on their property. That's what I meant.
If I recall correctly, that property was in complete disrepair. And we moved the maintenance man that was there over to a different house, who now is actually in that house on that lot. And we're giving him free housing on that lot. And just to make one more clarification point, I don't know if it's coming through on my application, but we're not doing park models. We're suggesting HUD-approved manufactured homes on this lot. So no more park models or RV certified anything. These are standard manufactured, nice, and they're small, 700-800 square feet, but they're manufactured HUD-approved homes.
Thank you.
I refute that. There was another...
I'm sorry, Mrs. Reynolds. There will be plenty of opportunity as well for additional comments. This will go before the county council as well, or the county commission. Thank you for your comments and for clarifying, Mr. Orris.
Emily, I've got a question.
Josie, I think, was still continuing hers, and then Garish, you can go next.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one other question, and that was addressing. Is anybody else hearing an echo?
Hey, Garish, could you mute real quick? Thank you.
So that was addressing Ms. Reynolds' concern that the employee houses would kind of be adjacent to their property. And looking at the site plan, it sort of looks like the proposed employee structures would be between the current residential structure and the rest of the RV property. And I wondered if there's anything that's keeping those from being like repositioned onto the more narrow strip of land on this side of the property, on the, I guess, west-ish.
Yeah, so the thing that makes that west side of the property unusable when you apply the HDHO is the project boundary buffer requirement, which is 20 feet. So that those setbacks don't allow for any building over there at all.
Great. So clarifying, it sounds like the proposed structure is sort of must be in this zone that seems to be buffered from the adjacent property.
Yeah, they have to be over there. Yeah, there's no possibility for anything to go to the west.
Cool. Garish?
Garish?
Okay, can you hear me now?
You can, thank you.
Okay. At one time there was a period when someone had to be employed in order to qualify for HDHO. Is that even applicable? And is there a requirement for how long someone lives in Grand County before they can occupy an HDHO building? I just can't remember.
So the employment requirement is absolutely true, and except we do have a provision for retirees, and I believe that they need to have made, I think, 5 years of their latest income years needed to have been in Grand County. And I don't the amount of time they have to be here before they qualify. That's a good question. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I don't know that we have a minimum time. It's just an income requirement.
Other than the
But I
5
will-
years as a retiree.
Retiree,
Yeah.
yes, or retiree, because they don't have current income in Grand County. But I'll look at that and I'll get back to you in just a minute, Garish.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it may be applicable to this situation if these are seasonal workers that come in and leave versus full-time residents of Grand County. And I just can't remember when we were talking about it, how it actually got written in the code. So I appreciate that.
Well, you have to rent it for, is it 6 or 9 months? So it isn't 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had the intention of it considering rentals for seasonal workers, as well as, I guess, off-season rentals then, but they had to be at least 6 months long. So it couldn't just be people popping in, for a month or so.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comments, or would somebody like to make a motion?
I actually have a quick question about the motion. I'm going to try to go to it, and probably a question for Mila. Oftentimes we do, we're going to forward a recommendation to the county commission to apply the high density overlay to this parcel. When we do that, of course, I guess you can go, you got to help me here. You can go to whatever the highest density allowed by the high density overlay, though it says as guided by the associated master plan. How binding is that?
It's entirely binding. So I put that in this motion just because you can restate it if you'd like, and just say that you forward a favorable recommendation to apply that high density housing overlay to the parcel and approve the associated master plan. I wrote it that way because the planning commission doesn't approve the master plan. The county commission does. But once the ordinance is applied, it is applied only with the associated master plan, and it is entirely binding. So the applicant would have to come back through the whole public hearing process again to add any more units, regardless of the density that was approved.
That's very helpful. If those words were subject to, would it matter?
Let me look at it.
Rather than guided by?
Subject to, yeah, sure. That sounds great.
And before you make your motion, Bob, would we also need to provide a requirement of the fencing, or is that already implicit in this? Because I couldn't remember where that got left from the first time this a similar application for this property came before us. I know we have the standards, so that wouldn't be necessary, right? To call out. Okay, thank you.
Unless you, and if you want to, you absolutely can. I don't believe that this project qualified for needing a fence.
So I would recommend that we add that with the framing of including a privacy fence at the behest of any surrounding neighbors. Feel free to amend that as necessary, Bob, but if Mr. Orris didn't feel the need to put a privacy fence between his two properties, I don't personally feel like we would need to require that, but certainly there are other neighbors who would be impacted.
I have another question about the motion. It just says high density housing overlay instead of -5 or 10 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Is that important? Or?
Am I on mute? I'm not. I took that out. I mean, you can really only apply the overlay in the eligibility district. So it seemed to me that you didn't need it, but if you want to add that detail in, that's totally fine.
I just think it might make more sense if it said that HDH5 is
sure. Mm-hmm. I think this is the HDH10, I believe.
Yeah, so but is the applicant requesting HDH5 or HDH10? Can we clarify that?
They would need to be requesting 10 because they'll end up at an 8 per acre.
Ah, because of, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh wait, why is it 8? I thought it was.
There'll be 4 units.
On 1 acre?
Well, oh no, you're right. It'd be 4 per acre. Sorry.
4 per acre.
I'm doing the math from the last project that we had. No, it would be 4 per acre. That's right. So it's a 5, which is lower than their eligibility district.
But in this case, if the application was for 10, can we clarify it to 5, or what is our legal boundaries there?
I don't, yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why I took it out. I don't think that you need to. Essentially, the high density housing overlay is the overlay that will be applied. And then the density is the eligibility zone. And then the density that's approved with the project is only that's on the master plan. So I think you only need to do the high density housing overlay. And then those eligibility zones are, supposed to guide the appropriate densities that can be permitted. And in this case, it's less than the potentially allowable density. So I think you're welcome to say that however you'd like. I think it will go to the county council, appropriately regardless. So if you wanted to specify 5 or 10, I think that's fine.
I don't have any strong feelings with that.
I recommend we specify 5 to clarify for county commission if this were to pass what we were making our recommendation based on.
I think it may be a little, that may be a little tricky since they are not in the 5 eligibility zone.
I think we've done that before where we've used a lower number than
A lower number, okay.
better match what's being proposed. So we've got a precedent for that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it gets the eligibility zones get a little bit tricky because, that would also imply that you can make a recommendation for it to go higher as well, which people are not.
I would say 5 is inherently in 10, but 10 is not inherently in 25. So
Okay.
Just based off of the way that the bodies have acted in the past. Again, recognizing that the master plan is ultimately the binding document, but for the sake of clarity and for the sake of the record, I would recommend we move forward with that specification, but in my opinion. All right, would anybody like to make a motion on this? We do need to make a motion one way or the other. Bob? You're muted.
But Bob, you're muted. Bob, you're muted.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Now I'm going to go to the motion here and see how I do. I move to forward a favorable recommendation to the county commission to apply the high density housing overlay -5 to the parcel located at 3324 Spanish Valley Drive, subject to the associated master plan, with the condition that private fencing at the behest of neighbors be built.
I second it.
All right, motion made by Bob, seconded by Brian. Bob, you have the floor if you want to make any comments.
Simply that this seems to be a reasonable project. I actually, again, on this HDHO stuff and affordable housing, I actually like that it's small housing. It's amazing, of course, that there won't be rental charge. There might be in the future, but the smaller housing means that people who don't have a lot of money can be housed.
Brian, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
I think my only comment is that I think the privacy fence would go a long way, and I really would encourage that with the surrounding neighbors.
Kevin?
Yeah, so I feel kind of conflicted about this. We've heard a lot of from the neighbors about the bad effects of having the RV park there. I think a lot of that has nothing to do with this proposal, but from the neighbor's point of view, this is just taking a bad situation and making it a little bit worse. I can understand that. And so I think it's unfortunate that this sort of non-conforming use came into the residential area. I don't know the history of that. And I think a more recent mistake is when we slapped the OAO zone on all existing overnight accommodations, even the non-conforming ones, which I think perhaps we should not have done, you know, a year ago. I think things like this that are kind of out of place, you know, should stay as a legal non-conforming use rather than, but that's not the question before us right now. I think I am impressed that the applicant seems to be willing to meet whatever requirements we have. You know, he just wants employee housing, and you know, he's been very amenable to suggestions. You know, maybe the privacy fence helps a little bit, but I think also one of the commenters made a very good point that at this point we're not, anything we approve now is not increasing the supply of HDH housing, because we've got a limited number of permits, and if we don't use them here, we'll just use them somewhere else instead. And maybe the question we should be asking is, you know, we're going to have a few more projects like this. Is this one that sort of makes the cut? And then I hesitate, because I've always thought that we shouldn't be doing it so far south in the valley, that, you know, we should be trying to focus these things closer to town. So all of that kind of leaves me on the fence. So that's what I have to say.
I would only add that I really do like small housing that's really inexpensive. Some of the high density housing overlay probably isn't all that inexpensive. So it does a thing that's, I think, needed in the county.
And I have mixed feelings about this. I don't necessarily like housing tied to employment, and since we get to pick and choose with the high density projects, you know, and that's the whole point, right? You sort of pick the ones that are, you know, the ones that you want in the communities, the ones that are, like mentioned before, maybe closer to town. So I don't particularly like that. I had another comment, but I can't remember what it was.
I think that if this was a application that wasn't adjacent to the place of work of the intended residents of this, or if this was a application from somebody who owned some company, but in an area intended for other people's employees, so, you know, a developer, we may, not necessarily, but may have a different opinion on it. And we have had several smaller projects like this come in. You know, I recognize that the original intent was for there to be higher density towards town. That's not what we've seen. At the same time, providing housing adjacent to work ultimately does decrease vehicular travel and noise of those people who work there, provides a value to those employees, decreases the costs of living by requiring less fuel costs and less vehicle management costs. So, you know, I think that there's trade-offs, and, you know, looking at this in the context of the project itself, and removed from the fact that while I recognize it's impossible to fully detach ourselves from, remove it from the fact that it is adjacent to the employers, into the employer and built by the employer, you know, I think there's merit to it. I will say that I do think there was some compelling points in the neighbor's letter raised as far as cost of living adjustments, and, you know, is this really the intent when an employer may be able to be in a position to provide employer housing by not using, you know, public amenities? Then is this something we should be using that for? But I sat on that question for a while. And where I landed with it is that the HDHO was intended to allow for there to be increased workforce housing and not specifically to be developed by individual people. We didn't put a bias on it to say only to be developed by private developers, or only to be developed by locals, or only to be developed by people who can make money off of it and send their kids to college. You know, the outcome of this is housing for households, at least 4 households. You know, there may be additional roommates who are employed in our community at a time when that is increasingly needed. And I support this application as a result of that. And I thank the applicant for the willingness to go further than is required to ensure neighborly behavior and try their best to offset some of the costs of density increases. And it's always going to come at a cost. But this is a place where I think community value, the people who are looking for housing aren't in a position to talk about how this may affect their property because they don't have any. I think we need to consider, I've raised this point before, that renters are members of our community, not just landowners. And I do value their need, and housing is something that we should be, in my opinion, prioritizing. So there's my soapbox.
And I remembered my only other comment was just thinking about, an ADU is also allowed on this property.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings as well. And I'm very sympathetic to a lot of the feelings in the letter, recognizing that denying this application doesn't really change what seems to be the most egregious things that are affecting neighbors. I do wonder with these units, if they are occupied by people who are not working for the RV park at any point, they are also subject as renters to that lower quality of life and living in those rental units. So that's just something that comes to my mind as well, is that yes, we should be thinking of people in this town who are renters, and by that mark, I wouldn't want to subject somebody to that kind of a rental situation if they weren't invested in that site.
I'm not going to counteract you because I totally hear that. I've thought about that, and what I've recognized in my journey there is it is egregious, it is wrong, it is sad that we live in a community right now where people do have to make such huge sacrifices in order to find places to live. And I truly hope that we continue to prioritize that as a community. With that said, for people who are looking for housing, some housing is better than no housing. And, we do have a market system that allows for people to opt out, but also to allow people to opt in. And unfortunately, we do live in a scenario where many people have to opt in to less than ideal conditions because the alternative is far worse than the reality. And, again, I think that's probably removed from this individual application, but it is definitely something that we should continue to consider as a body. So I really appreciate your comments, Josie.
I'd like to call for the question.
All right. So the motion on the table is to forward a favorable recommendation to the County Commission to apply the HDH 05 to the parcel located at 3324 Spanish Valley Drive, subject to the associated master plan and subject to the requirement that the developer build a property fence at the behest of any neighbors. All in favor of this motion, raise your hand or say aye. 1, 2, 3, 4. Garish, are you against or in favor? Aye. Okay, so Emily, Brian, Josie, Bob, Garish. Garish, can you mute? Okay, all opposed? Rachel, all who abstain? Kevin. So the motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Orris, and Ms. Reynolds. Thank you very much for your comments. You're welcome to forward those photos to planning@greencountyutah.net. And this will come before the County Commission, and there will be an opportunity for public comment at that meeting, as well as the ability to submit your comments beforehand. So thank you very much. All right. So this takes us back to our earlier discussion item, and we also have the discussion item of retail in a highway commercial zone. I would like to, well, let's go back to the small area plan. Let's see where we're sitting as far as time and what we have on our agenda. So where we left it was looking at retail sales and service, whether conditional or permitted or not, fuel service, whether conditional or permitted or not, and agriculture. And I think what would be great is just to see if we can get to some general consensus for the sake of drafting for these. knowing that as we get citizen comment, as we go through legal review, we will have the opportunity to update this as well. Okay. So there's been some comments raised in favor of maintaining outfitter, guide service, and facility as conditional, as well as all personal service oriented uses as conditional. Let's take a just quick straw poll on each of these on keeping them conditional and then deal with any controversy. Does everyone feel okay with that?
It isn't part of the issue that that these outfitter guides and services included a mixture of things, some of which we might favor, some of which not. It's not just a yes, no, or conditional permitted question.
Well, where we left it was, I mean, with regards to specific uses of outfitter guide service, the sense from Mila was that we would not be able to individually restrict specific uses unless we pulled them out as line items. And even then, I think we would be subject to some legal issues. But by providing this as a conditional use, we can have heightened conditions such as decibel restrictions by time of day, by overall decibel, and other creative means of decreasing the impact, decreasing the likelihood of some more high impact uses that would fall under that categorization. Did I restate that correctly, Mila?
Sounds about right.
Okay. So let's just go line by line. So outfitter, guide service, and facility, all in favor of keeping this a conditional use in the table, just raise your hand or say aye if I can't see you.
Aye.
Okay. Josie, Rachel, Emily.
Aye.
Garish. Okay, that's consensus.
Yes.
So and Brian, great. So let's leave that as conditional. All personal service oriented uses, all in favor of keeping that as conditional, raise your hand or say aye. Josie, Emily, I actually can't see
Yes.
everyone.
Yes.
Brian. Bob. That gets us a 4.
Have we discussed what falls into this category? I thought
That is my question too,
I'm
because
a little
it's,
confused by it.
yeah, so I don't know how to vote if I'm,
is this a escort service for, I'm just teasing, but that's a personal service oriented use.
Mhm.
it just sounds a bit too general to me, and it seems like we've covered, the previous item covers what we were intending to allow. But what will be the harm in taking this out?
Well, sorry, Mila, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna offer some details. It's, generally, I think this kind of thing is, haircuts and that sort of thing. I think it's, again, some of these categories are broad on purpose and can be helpful for us when we do come up with something that is new, but yeah, I guess, so the only other thing I was going to say is that the outfitter, guide service, and facility, the only thing that we have as a condition right now for those, or use specific standard, is that they must screen their storage. So, if we wanted to add use specific standards, that is an option. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be conditional as well. It can be just a use specific standard. And that would apply for all zones.
Wouldn't the personal service oriented, wouldn't that be like, we have some action photography services in town where it's not necessarily outfitter or guide, but it's not strictly retail? I don't know, but I would imagine something like that would fall under that category.
Yeah, it can. A lot of those end up being home offices, actually. That kind of, if you're not seeing clients, but, it would be that kind of thing, yes, if people were actually coming to the business. Yeah, a lot of the time we permit a lot of those as a home office, though. So it requires a little bit more clientele involvement to not be permitted as a home office.
So if we were to allow single family homes and a massage therapist lived at home and offered massages out of their house, that would fall under this use?
No, I think that would be a home office.
I'm sorry,
Most likely.
I misunderstood you. So all personal service oriented uses I thought you said included home offices. So that's,
Oh, no, sorry,
Fine.
the other way around. Yeah, so that would usually be a home occupation. If somebody was just in their house with an office, and didn't see very many people. I think, this could probably be like a gym. I have to say, we have not used this yet in the business licenses that I've seen. So I'm not entirely sure, but sometimes things come up and you look through the use table and that's where it goes. So I don't know exactly what we might decide to do. Although I will point out that office is not permitted in this zone.
so does any commissioner have a suggestion on how to deal with this particular line item, which Mila, if you just go back to it, it's,
Sorry, yes.
oh, no, you're all right, all personal service oriented uses. So is there a commissioner who'd like to recommend that we keep a conditional, make it permit, or scrap it? And then we could do a straw poll on that.
I recommend that we scrap it. I think, we're trying to be restrictive in this zone and to have such a broad category where we ourselves are not sure what might fall under that, line item. I just think that's a bad idea. If in the future we find we've been too restrictive, we can make adjustments then. I think it's better to start more restrictive and then add things when we realize we've been too restrictive than the reverse.
Given my misunderstanding, I would tend to agree with that. Quick straw poll. So who would be in favor of scrapping it for the sake of drafting? Emily, Kevin, Rachel,
Yes.
Bob, Josie, Brian, and maybe Garish, but we've reached consensus. So we'll remove that as a use. All right, moving down to all other sales oriented uses. So maybe Mila, could you clarify ahead of time what it is we're talking about, since,
okay. Yeah, so this one is a little bit more straightforward. All other sales oriented uses is literally any other retail. So this is an incredibly broad category. And our retail category doesn't have a lot of options. So I think what we heard from the county commission workshop was that it would be acceptable, or it would be desired to have the option for gift stores or gift shops as a secondary use to, whatever else it was that was out there. So I think, one option, I think really the option probably is to not permit the all other sales oriented uses, but then add a line item that, and I'll look up for examples in other code as to how that might be addressed, but add a line item that allowed for, small retail of kind of certain types. Right now, all other sales oriented uses would permit pretty much anything, not a car, an auto sales, that's down in vehicle sales and service. That is a separate category. But, a big box store, for instance, would be subject to our viewshed standards, of course, but would be allowed out here.
So this could, there's been rumors for the past 30 years that Walmart's coming here. So this could be the place where Walmart goes.
And that would be the category.
Yeah, so
we restrict the size of retail uses under our heightened development standards, just like we did with OAO development.
Mm-hmm. We can, sure, and we can restrict the size of buildings and height and all of that. But I think if we wanted to have it just be that secondary gift shop, then I think we should break that out as a separate line item.
Mm-hmm.
I actually liked that, getting rid of the all others and doing something that allows a gift shop or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think circling back to the public survey, there does not seem to be a lot of desire for primary retail in this area. And so I would agree with that having a secondary retail line item makes a lot more sense than having this line item.
Yeah, I don't like this broad category. If there was something more limited, like standalone gift shops, it doesn't seem out of the question to me. But I guess I'd want to, start from nothing and then add things that we understand, rather than start from a huge category and then try to eliminate a few things.
Okay. So straw poll of removing all other sales-oriented uses and adding a line item for secondary retail. Bob, Emily, Josie, Kevin, gotta hit the arrow.
Yes.
Rachel, Brian. I think we lost Garish. Okay. Perfect. Now, sorry, I said fuel service, but I think we actually resolved that earlier. Am I wrong on that we thought that belonged more towards the airport.
That's what I have written down, is that none. And then potentially adding an item to, adding a line item for electric vehicle charging stations.
Mhm.
And I do think that those, I think it's unclear, to be honest, you know, whether or not those would be part of could be part of a parking lot. I think it depends on if it's a business or not, as far as the code goes right now, what we're looking at here. So, you know, if a restaurant or somebody were to be providing a charging station and it was free in their parking lot, I think that, you know, that would be fine right now. If it was just a charging station by itself, then I think that would fall under fuel service at the moment. And so I think if we wanted to allow there to just be a charging station, you know, that charged for charging, we could add a line item that said specifically electric vehicle charging station.
Great. General consensus of breaking that out, adding an item for electric vehicle charging station underneath fuel in the use tables in general. Raise your hand.
Yes.
Okay. And Rachel, okay, all of
Comment
us.
that was in the chat. Sometimes the electric vehicle stations are also secondary to other businesses. Is that true? So also allowing for that.
Okay. That leaves agriculture.
Yeah, so just to recap, the industrial uses, none were allowed and none are allowed. So we'll skip that one.
Okay. So the general comment from the county commission was most, if not, well, half to most of the parcels in this area, certainly the surrounding area, are agriculture in nature. Continuing to allow agriculture would maintain that more rural feel for the area. These are not all equal. Somebody raised fruit stands, which I'm still waiting for somebody to define exactly what that is, because that was very controversial a year ago when we were trying to figure that out. We'll let that one slide for a moment. So Mila, what would be your guidance here based off of what you've seen from the public and what you've heard from both bodies so far?
I would recommend that we allow agriculture for the most part. I think range and grazing is, you know, the other half of the parcels up there, and they already allow for it. So, you know, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't let some of these resort special parcels, you know, essentially down zone to these uses that are much less impact for the most part. I know that water is definitely a concern. You know, that is something that's out there, at least for agriculture, et cetera, would be, you know, governed by availability and water rights and things like that. You know, I hope it doesn't make any sense to have, you know, a really water and soil intensive operation. That just doesn't work. It's all basically rangeland anyway. So from a feasibility standpoint, I wouldn't think we'd have to worry too much about that. And I think that it would essentially just match resort special zone to some of the surrounding uses. And I guess the reason I just say that is that I think it's unlikely somebody would apply for a rezone from resort special to range and grazing.
Yeah, I remember that comment at the workshop, but you know, and I think the comment was, well, range and grazing is agriculture, so why wouldn't we add agriculture? But I think that's just an argument for the third from the bottom line in this category where they've got grazing broken out. And so, yeah, I think that it would make sense to put a P there, but for most of the others, it doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, certainly not feedlots, you know, kennels doesn't make that much sense. Feed mill, you know, that's a big industrial thing. So I would think the large majority of these uses are not appropriate to the area and have nothing to do with the way the area has been traditionally used.
What if somebody wanted to have a stable and do horse packing out in that area?
Wouldn't that fall under outfitting maybe?
That would probably be a barn and a corral. But I guess it would be both.
I would say, I mean, animal raising, I assume that's sort of more commercial versus having a horse farm. I don't know how we would differentiate. Ultimately, I think you're interpreting for us as far as like where you would put that if somebody came in with that use. So, you know,
yeah, so I'll give you an example. What we just recently permitted Underdog south of town, and since they are not a commercial overnight, here you each person has a space for their dog. They're not a kennel. And we decided that they were animal raising, for instance, because they own all of the dogs. They, take care of them themselves, so that kind of a thing could be animal raising. It could also be, obviously a feedlot is a different thing, but, animal raising can also be probably beekeeping or, llamas or pigs or something like that, chickens. A lot of these things are open to interpretation. I will say that feed mill is not allowed in range and grazing. Neither is fruit and vegetable stand. I think a fruit and vegetable stand, I guess there was some controversy about that, but it is allowed in general business and highway commercial. And there are some highway commercial parcels out there as well. Grazing is permitted. Winery is a conditional use in range and grazing. So is a feedlot. So there are, there are some options here. It is pretty broken out as a category. So if commissioners wanted to, potentially just pick grazing and call it good, then, that is also something we could do.
I would certainly like to see feedlot and feed mill removed from this. I can imagine, especially in times of potential economic downturn, when land in this area is cheap, that becoming a use and decreasing the sense of a gateway to our community. The controversy of the fruit and vegetable stand was if somebody was selling peaches out of their driveway, was that a use that would be permitted or not permitted in residential? But it took up actually several evenings of conversation as we were trying to figure out where that line was drawn. So I apologize for that context, that's just sort of out of context. But I mean, we have examples on when 28 of horse raising and horse packing. I can imagine this could be a suitable area. Could be interesting to see that as a tourism-based recreational choice that kind of wasn't one of those more high impact choices that we've seen. I could see this being a place for a fruit stand, where people might come in and sell some of those delicious peaches from Western Colorado and melons from Green River for visitors coming to town. I don't know if I would support that or not, but I don't think that that's as high impact of a use I'm concerned about. Kevin.
So I propose that we allow grazing and fruit and vegetable stands and not the others.
Okay. Anyone feel any controversy about that? Speak now. Great, let's go with that for the sake of drafting. I think that's a great recommendation.
I think Brian was trying to say something.
Brian, I'm sorry. Oh, we can't hear you. Oh no.
We're muted. There we go. Okay. I got a double mute. Anyhow, for animal raising, like if somebody wanted to have backyard chickens and they have, 10 chickens or whatever the county standard is, I think we should allow that.
Mm-hmm.
I think backyard chickens don't count as animal raising.
But you thought beekeeping might.
They are allowed.
Depends what you're doing with it. I think a lot of these are a lot of them come up when people apply for business licenses. So a lot of them are based on commercial operations, but we're not permitting everybody raising their puppy as animal raising in their house, right? So I think there's, it becomes an actual primary use of the property when it's a lot more than just, your pets, essentially.
So the one thing I would like to see added, and I am sort of indifferent permitted versus conditional, but I don't know what conditions I would place on it, is a kennel. You know, there's a lot of people who leave their dogs in their cars. And if we are hoping that this becomes a hub, I can't guarantee that this would happen, but I would love to see some sort of animal run in this area. I'd certainly hate to not allow it just by means of the land use table. And the closest one would be 30 miles away.
And that one, those do, just so you all know, have use specific standards already. And they involve, I believe, some pretty big setbacks at the very least. You can't have an outdoor kennel. This is our use specific standards already. So no outdoor kennels are allowed. They can be no less than 300 feet from a residential structure. No outdoor exercise run area can be less than 50 feet from any residential zone. All cages, pens, and grooming areas have to be in a completely enclosed soundproof building. They all have to eliminate their emissions of odor, of offensive odor.
All right. So it's almost 7 o'clock. Let's do a quick, just again, straw poll on these three. And if there's any other comments, we'll deal with it. Otherwise, we'll move forward. So all in favor of kennels being a permitted use, raise your hand, say aye. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Okay. Brian, Emily, Rachel. Anyone that I missed? Okay, so that one doesn't make it in. All in favor of fruit and vegetable stand as a permitted use, raise your hand, say aye. Kevin, Emily, Josie, Brian,
Yeah,
Bob,
yes.
Rachel, great. All in favor of grazing, raise your hand, say aye. Kevin, Emily, Josie, Brian, Rachel, or excuse me, Bob, Rachel. Great, okay. So anyone have any last comments to save any of these others? Otherwise, we'll strike them.
You did also say grazing?
I did say grazing. Yeah, I just
You did,
did. That
good.
was grazing right there. Yep.
Grazing along with it. Okay, good.
Cool. Okay, so that gets us through the use tables. Mila, were there any others that we are missing?
We did say that we were potentially going to come back to the all other outdoor recreation. So
Okay.
we can strike that for now if you want. That might be easier. And then, you know, as I said, you know, this is a public hearing process. We've got a few more rounds to go. So
Raise your hand, make your comment if you are not willing to strike that right now. Okay, cool. Let's do that.
Great.
Let's move forward.
all right, perfect. And I think that was it that I had that we needed to come back to.
Wonderful. All right. What do you want to just give a quick summary of what we wanted to cover in retail and highway commercial zone and see where that takes us? And if we
yeah,
want to
so this is I think maybe something of a lingering issue. I would, if I can, suggest that the Planning Commission consider it as soon as you can, if not tonight. We do have some businesses that are in highway commercial that are south of town that are operating as general retail. And I believe they were permitted maybe before, I don't know if that got taken out or what exactly the history was there, but as of right now in our highway commercial zone, we do not allow for all other retail. So essentially there's no general retail allowed in highway commercial. The Family Dollar and Standard Plumbing are in this zone. We also have the auto sales down there and a few others. So it's been suggested by the county leadership that it would be great to kind of rectify this situation. And if the Planning Commission has any appetite to permit general retail and highway commercial.
So I think I heard maybe some previous discussion that the idea behind taking general retail out of highway commercial is people wanted to force the retail within city limits where they pay better taxes.
I don't think that's happening.
Right, yeah, no, I wasn't, that was just a historical note. I mean, I support putting it back into highway commercial. Personally.
Yeah, I don't believe it's happening either. Plus, there's no property downtown for the people, the businesses to open up. So
Yeah.
we're expanding south.
Is there anyone who would not like to see this be something we consider?
Yeah, so I think it's a good idea to change the use table to allow general retail in the highway commercial zone.
So why don't we have a public hearing on that as soon as possible? I don't know exactly what that would mean as far as noticing with our schedule right now, but
I can actually, I think I can actually notice that tomorrow for the next meeting.
great. Well, let's
So,
let's
and
go ahead
that'll
and do
just
that.
be a very straightforward land use code amendment.
Can you give me just a quick list of some things that are general retail? Like just,
Yeah, any store that sells anything other than the things that are called out in our code, which is, I think, garden, lumber. Let me go back up to this section. So, where did we talk about? There we go. So it's anything other than building materials, a greenhouse, a nursery, or an auto repair or a repair shop. So everything else is general retail. So,
okay.
yeah.
An outfitter rental services, that's a separate.
Right. Yeah. So sales of anything other than those kind of outdoor like supplies that are called out.
I think it would be interesting to, I'm sorry, you said auto sales are
That's separate.
separated out?
Mhm.
Okay. Does that include, I guess it would include sort of sales of things that would be more recreational than like UTV, OHV would be included in auto sales?
Yeah, I think that would still be auto sales. It just says vehicle sales. So any vehicles I would qualify as that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Great. So let's notice that.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting. We have talked about in this use table just a couple things that seem like they should be pulled out of these broad categories. You know, we wouldn't be able to notice this in time, but I think it's worth us looking at these and kind of thinking about other specific uses that we would like to line item as we're looking at these tables. Okay.
And I can write up a summary of that for next time if we want to address it.
That'd be great. That'd be great. All right, let's move on to future considerations. So one of the things that I've asked Mila to do is, as we're starting to think about what comes next, our future priorities. So we are about to go into legal review, which gives us some time to start looking at some of the items that have come up, like B&Bs in residential zones, how, if we want to address that, and how potentially considering an overnight accommodation for educational facilities, and how we should approach that in the code. We have, as was brought up this evening, the continued use of revisiting our use tables, specifically conditional use permits. I think it would be great to dive into that at our next meeting, since it's something that we can start to address while we're getting some of these more controversial items up for public hearing. And then looking ahead to early next year, which, thank goodness, the chill is in the air at night, is nearly upon us. Summer is waning. Things like looking at the airport small area plan on the backside of what we're currently looking at. We've also had some interest in that Crescent Junction to sort of down towards the airport and then out to some other smaller communities in that I-70 range. So I just want to be thinking about some of these. If anyone has any thoughts or other things that they'd like to see brought up related to them, just to be bringing those to staff early so that staff can guide us, and Mila in her new role can help us balance that with, you know, as we see our economy hopefully start to power back up going into next year, some of the, you know, applications that have slowed down this summer that we'll also see. So any concerns with doing a land use review? Maybe we pick 2 categories a meeting, right? We kind of, that's what we were doing, or we were looking at think residential still needs to be done. So Mila, I'll let you guide us on where we start there. And then could you at our next meeting just revisit those two other items, which is the OAO for educational and B&B and residential? I feel like these have been discussion items. We haven't really talked about like what staff's recommendation might be on them or the parameters we need to look at. And I think it'd be great just to have a staff report included in our packet on each of those,
Okay.
so that we can discuss those as a body.
Sure.
Is that good?
Great. Yeah, we can definitely do that. And then, you know, not to add to the plate, but the Housing Task Force does have a number of housing related land use code updates that we'll be presenting to the County Commission pretty soon. And I can send that presentation, at least the slide deck, on to commissioners if everybody isn't there, because those are some things that we have on the list to take up here pretty soon too.
Okay. Now I may have misspoke. Are we reviewing the draft next time, or is that going
Hopefully.
into legal review? Okay, so I'm sorry. Let's put off the land use table,
Great.
the use tables off. I'm sorry, to when it's in legal review. So,
Okay.
but I do think it'd be great still to just kind of just touch on those two other items just briefly, just so we can start to plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else for future considerations from anyone? Okay, we're going to get those two meetings scheduled for early October, preferably that second week in October, one at the ball fields and one remotely, as well as once we have the draft ready to go, put that on the website and have a survey similar to the Mill Creek partnership survey. If you want the Planning Commission to weigh in on those questions, just start a Google Doc and we can contribute to help ease the load, because I know you are working, you are carrying quite a bit right now. So thank you. So call us in where needed. Great. Let's look at the recent building permit review. And then Jalen is not here today, so maybe you could just touch on what happened in the county council meeting with your updates. Thanks.
Yeah, so the recent building permit, we had one addition and remodel, 10 new construction, and then one new construction in Castle Valley and 3 more solar. So it seems like solar is marching along. And Olivia, do you know, are these 10 new construction, are those still part of either Arroyo Crossing or the self-help homes?
I believe so,
Okay,
from what I recall.
so we'll be seeing building permits for some more of those soon. Okay, and then county council. So let's see, last week, gosh, I don't remember exactly what we what we approved last week. But the thing that's that is probably of the most interest to planning commissioners is that Willow Springs has been brought back for another vote. That was requested by one of the county commissioners, and that is the Willow Springs RV Park, Reed Pendleton's project out in the node that we are currently planning for. And that is not a new public hearing, but any commissioner is allowed to request an item on the agenda. And that one is going to be revoted on tomorrow. We've already received more than 80 comments opposed and 1 for. Staff and the county attorney are both recommending that it is denied. As to, I mean, particularly from staff's position, considering the planning efforts that we're going through and the fact that it doesn't go well with what we've seen and what we're aiming for. You know, and I think that if it were to come before us now, it probably would be, you know, a lot easier to turn down without controversy. The county attorney is recommending a no, largely based on the historic opposition the first time, which we are seeing again. So it's remains to be seen what will happen with that at the meeting.
So in the past, Planning Commission has at times written letters guiding planning or county, formerly council, on issues that have come up that are not specifically in front of us. I will disclose that a county council member called me and asked me my opinion on bringing this up. And I was very, very delicate as far as my recommendation. What I told this county commissioner was that given the fact that the county commission has directed us to take on this planning effort. And given the fact that there have been other applications in the area that have also been denied on account of that planning process, and to approve one would raise questions about the others, that I would highly recommend that they consider the public's interest in this and refrain from giving a personal recommendation one way or another. That said, I feel very strongly about the fact that we are embarking on this planning process in part because we want to be intentional and specifically get community input about the uses and development in this area. And while we have had a survey, we have not put our small area plan up to full public scrutiny in its draft form. And it was the overwhelming opinion of the county commission to seek public input before addressing any of these. So all that said, I would be very interested in writing a letter and would be happy to draft it and have it ready for review by the Planning Commission by 10 a.m. tomorrow. If it's something other commissioners would be interested in, if not, I may speak as a citizen on this issue, but certainly don't want to suggest that my voice carries for the body without overwhelming interest in it.
I'd be interested in it. I wrote a letter that already to the commissioners and focused on the plan being developed, and that it was especially bad timing, and urging them not to approve this. Personally, you know, if a letter from the commission would help, that would be fine.
And Emily, I mean, if I understood you correctly, I agree with what you said, and I would be happy to sign on to such a letter. I was planning on speaking at the meeting, you know, just as myself, opposing it. So, and you know, maybe it's more useful if we just come as individuals and they get to hear the message multiple times instead of just once.
I'm fine with that. I will say that, you know, the general makeup of our county body politic is that the county commission appoints these boards to give them recommendations. And I recognize that our recommendations are by no means binding, but given that the county commission has signals one intent to us to reflect community interest and is signaling a different to respect an individual developer's interest, really does bother me. And I don't want to opine in this particular setting too far, because I think it is something that's worth bringing up to the county commission. But I will say that, you know, as now chair of this body, I would recommend we speak as a body in addition as individuals. But again, if there's not the interest, I'm fine with that. I'm sure that enough of them will hear our voices to sort of get the gist. So
I'd be in support of a letter for those reasons you outlined. I've been in that situation before, and it's good to sort of just remind people that, you know,
okay.
We've been appointed to make recommendations to them.
And I would also sign on to such a letter.
Okay, well, I will draft something brief and try and get it out by about 10 a.m. and won't get it into their packet, obviously, but if there's interest in signing onto it, and I think if there's majority of the body interest in adopting it, I'm happy to join the public meeting and read it into the record. So is everyone comfortable with that? Yeah? Brian, are you comfortable with that? Double mute, double mute.
Yeah, I don't think I would support a letter. I think individually, everybody should speak. So
Okay.
That's my opinion.
All right, well, I will circulate that. And if individual commissioners would like to sign it, we can submit it as individual commissioners, but not represent the body as a whole. So, okay. Thank you, everyone.
Can I just add to that, just real quick, is that just do remember that it's not a public hearing. Mary can call for comment at that item, but you may need to make sure that you speak during citizens to be heard.
Can we circulate comments to them via email ahead of time and have it be considered for the record? Okay, so I could send the letter via email.
Yes, and you can still absolutely speak, but just like our meetings, it would be, you know, something that's on the agenda, but it's not a public hearing. So you would want to speak up during citizens to be heard. Mary has, however, in the past, the chair has the discretion to open the floor to public comment at a meeting, at an item that is not a public hearing. So considering the interest, she may also do that. But, you know, just so you know, if you wanted to get to the meeting in time to make a public comment, you may need to be there for citizens to be heard.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. And I also looked up and remembered what our other item was at the last council meeting, which is that the Strawberg final plat was approved. So that's done.
All right. Any other updates? All right. Who moves, we go home? Well, go home. We all are home. Who moves, we sign off? Kevin moves. Bob seconds. Lovely. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.